We're live.
We are live. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We are live at the National Adverse Drug Event Awareness Day. Susan, would you like to tell us a little bit about what we're about
I would
to?
like to tell you a little bit more about it. National Adverse Drug Event Day was started 5 years ago by the Society for American Pharmacovigilance. The reason being that adverse drug events are responsible for an inordinate number of deaths in our country currently. It is the third leading cause of death. The bad reactions to pharmaceuticals, as well as other iatrogenic, meaning caused by the medical system, harms. So, because of that, because we are in what I would call a crisis, uh, the American Society of Pharmacovigilance has convened a panel. There will be a series of roundtable discussions today, and present at the round table, which is right around the corner, are people from a variety of industries. So there is folks here from the pharmaceutical industry, people who are here as patients that were harmed themselves by adverse reactions. There are, I believe, there's a presence from, I am losing my train of thought, but there are some others present as well, all designed around a common goal of let's discuss what's going on, let's identify where the harms are coming from, where the inadequacies and breakdown in the systems are, and then let's put our heads together and try to figure out what we can do to improve things. When I say let's put our heads together, it is not just the 15 or so people who are in the other room. We're taking Q&A here, and by we, I mean me and Liam, who are, I guess, the hosts, if you will, for today, as well as if you attend the actual webinar, you can post questions right in the chat there as well.
Yes, and uh, I should have that link available
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm. It's on Eventbrite.
for
I might be able
our.
to email it to you. Would that be helpful?
I think I have it.
You should have it. If you go on either my Facebook or my LinkedIn, I reposted this morning, so it should be right there at the top.
Perfect. We'll do that. So they should be starting in any.
Yeah, they should be starting momentarily. It's about 10:03. They're all in there. Everybody is ready.
I got your cards.
Yes.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Make sure we did that.
Yep, yep. That was Bob Schwartz popping in to let me know that he has cards available. They are business cards and they provide the link to his documentary that he made. Bob made a incredibly powerful documentary of about 30 minutes long about what happened to him. I don't want to go too far into it right now because there will be other things to talk about in 1 or 2 minutes as soon as things get started. But his story really exemplifies just how bad an adverse medical event can be as a result of what happened to him when he was prescribed a lethal dose of an ADHD medication, which prompted him to go into psychosis, which derailed him for quite a period of time. Bob lost his family, his job, self esteem, home, and reputation. I have incredible admiration for anybody who can go public with a story like that and can reorient himself to channel his anger and his frustration into working for a common good, which is trying to make sure that
Okay.
it happens. Mhm.
Looks like we're starting.
Great. I'm just going to turn my ringer off on my phone so that doesn't interrupt. Okay. Liam, is there anything that you want me to be saying at this moment or just wait for the?
No, that's good. We're troubleshooting the echo.
Got it.
first prescribed as a child. And for the past 3 years, I have been attempting an extremely slow, reducing about 1/10 of a milligram. That's less than a 1% reduction because that's all my nervous system can tolerate. But even at that pace, I need months to partially stabilize between reductions. I'm still living with ongoing withdrawal symptoms and the long-term effects of withdrawal injury. This has left me with significant health challenges, cognitive difficulties, emotional blunting, and just an overall reduced quality of life. I don't know if I'll be able to fully discontinue without becoming severely disabled again. And my story is not rare. It really reflects a much larger hidden epidemic that is quietly devastating the lives of countless families and individuals. So I use my platform to raise awareness, and I sit on the board of the Antidepressant Coalition for Education. It's the only US nonprofit solely dedicated to addressing the serious adverse effects of antidepressants, including withdrawal. So when these drugs are reduced or stopped too quickly, it can trigger what is known as withdrawal injury or protracted withdrawal. So this is a serious and still under-recognized adverse effect in neurological injury that can occur that occurs under the dangerously fast discontinuation methods that are still commonly used in medical practice today. For some people, this can mean intense, unrelentless suffering, loss of basic functioning, disability that lasts decades. In the most severe cases, people in withdrawal, it's so overwhelming. Many people take their lives in withdrawal. So these withdrawal reactions are misunderstood and misdiagnosed as a relapse of the underlying condition by doctors, and this can lead to additional medications, inappropriate treatment, and further harm. So antidepressants are taken by tens of millions of people, but there is still no clear evidence-based step-by-step clinical framework showing doctors how to help patients safely discontinue them. So, and the tapering approach is still used today, is shaped by older assumptions that withdrawal would be brief and mild. So, however, research has found that these recommendations are based on limited evidence and do not reflect the realities faced by many long-term users. So there's people experiencing these injuries that could be prevented with slower, more individualized tapering approaches. So this is why ACE is working to establish national authoritative evidence-based tapering guidelines so people can come off these medications safely without these devastating neurological consequences. And also, another big thing that ACE is working on is US antidepressant drug labels do not clearly communicate the true scope, severity, and potential permanence of some of the most serious risks associated with these drugs. So this includes the possibility of the severe withdrawal injury, which is akin to a brain injury. And then also something called PSSD, that it's a condition that can persist. You can take the medication one time and have permanent sexual, cognitive, and emotional effects that don't resolve once you stop taking the medication. And it's really, truly devastating for people it happens to. So given the seriousness and altering nature of these outcomes, I really believe it warrants black box warnings and updating the labels. So right now, with the most serious risks are minimized or absent, true informed consent becomes impossible, and patients and families are left making decisions without critical information about these drugs that can profoundly alter the course of their life, and they're not able to make a true risk-benefit decision. So yes, thank you so much.
Danny, thank you for sharing your story. It's really truly horrifying to think that what happened to you that you've been having to endure is happening all across the country right now, and that's why your message is so important. And we're so thankful for you sharing your story, and also your advocacy work. It's really, really important. So
Thank you.
we have, and really the reason why we're meeting here today is to try to come up with some solutions to try to mitigate as much as we can that happening to folks. So here's an overview of today's agenda. Each session, the format is going to be a short framing presentation followed by a facilitated discussion with the roundtable. We'll also be asking questions from online. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat. And at the end of every hour, our friend and colleague, Michelle Sarkisian, will be moderating the online questions. So you can also post them on X. In addition, from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern, we will have breakout sessions for all of you online. So I'll just give you a preview of the sessions now so that you can start thinking about which session or sessions that you'd like
Susan,
to join.
would you like to
So first we
comment?
have John
So far,
Spagnola.
let's
He's
see.
Sure.
CEO of
Would it be
Veterans.
possible for you to mute them only because thank you. I will comment that, my goodness, her story is horrific. Her story is ubiquitous. I have heard that story or variations of it over and over and over. I think one of the parts that resonated most with me was every symptom that I experienced as a result of what the drug was doing to me was then interpreted by a medical professional as further indication of my underlying psychiatric disturbance, which then required a new medication. That was also a portion of what Bob was saying when he was telling his very tragic story. I see it all the time. I see it in clients. I see it in friends. I've seen it in family members. It's real. I mean, it's very, very, very real. What also really boggles my mind is that a doctor, a psychiatrist, told Danielle that SSRI withdrawal did not exist. That is stunning to me because I don't know how any human could say that, let alone someone who works with people on these drugs day in and day out. But again, I hear that all the time. And despite the fact that a person has a medical degree, it does not mean that they know how to taper somebody at a sufficiently slow rate off of the drugs. I'm thinking of a client that I worked with recently who came to me at the end of December of 2025. She was a mess. She had been on 200 milligrams of Prozac, which is the highest dose that you can be on. A doctor who was not a psychiatrist, her general doctor, brought her from that dose of 200 milligrams all the way down to 0 milligrams over a 2 to 3 month period. That is so much more quickly than it should have happened. A person could honestly take several years to do a very graduated incremental reduction in dosage over time so that they would not experience some of the horrific withdrawal symptoms. So the doctor told her when he met with her, if you have any difficulties, give me a call. She called him 3 times and he never returned the call. And this again is what I think that the majority of patients are up against, is that they feel that there's no one to turn to because the person who prescribed the drug is now not responding to my phone calls. I'm now a train wreck of falling apart, wondering if I'm losing my mind, wondering what's going on. I don't know who to turn to. So Danielle, fortunately, was able to access an online support group. And there are a variety of them. There is the one that she mentioned. There is the group that was started by Laura Delano. Laura Delano is a Harvard graduate. Do you need me to stop, Liam?
No, keep going.
Laura Delano is a Harvard graduate. Her story is very similar, only she was the ripe old age of 16, not 7, when she was told after a 15-minute interview with a psychiatrist that she had bipolar disorder and would require medication for the rest of her life. She believed that, and her family did, and she began her experience with psychotropics and spent a decade bouncing in and out of the psychiatric hospital, battling suicidal impulses and having multiple suicide attempts. Eventually, the light bulb began to click that despite being heavily medicated, she wasn't doing any better a decade into this process. She began to consider whether she might do better coming off of the drugs. I can't remember exactly what her process was, how long it took, but she is now off of the drugs, doing better, and has an entire foundation set up to help people with the emotional support component as they are tapering off of the drugs. And the final resource that I would like to mention is an entity called roadback.org. They are an entity that helps people taper. They have within their service that they provide, a compounding pharmacy, so that if you, for example, were on 25 milligrams of Prozac and you want to go to 24, which is not a dose that you can get at a regular Walgreens, Rite Aid, CVS, you can have it compounded so that you can go as gradually as you need to go. There was a support person there that helped a client of mine who, again, was in a polypharma situation and just a complete drug fog and not so functional. When she first came to me, they tapered her at an extraordinarily gradual rate. They advised her on things, even including her diet. So, for example, turmeric, which is a spice that many people use, it shows up in Indian food, it's tasty, but turmeric has a beneficial effect on the liver, which means that the level of medication in your system might alter. Excuse me, I'm just going to shut the door.
I've been hearing questions in
So she
Atlanta
was
around
advised-
legislation and the legislative session.
So she was
Go ahead.
advised. I'm sorry?
Absolutely. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Yep. So she was advised not to have turmeric, only because that would make it harder to calibrate her blood levels. So yeah, there's so much to say about this. In addition, I have a friend who the issue was never depression or anxiety, but it's an individual who has seizures and needed to do I guess we'll call it a crossover, where her medical team would be gradually tapering her down on one seizure medication and at the same time bringing her up on a different one. That turned into a very complicated process. At one point, the doctor recommended a certain medication. And this friend of mine said to the doctor, well, isn't that going to interact with medication A that I'm also on? And the doctor said, nah, you're going to be fine. Fortunately, this person knew enough to be Googling on her telephone as the doctor was telling her this. So she held up the phone and said, it's not what I'm seeing on the phone. What I'm seeing on the phone is that indeed there could be a negative interaction. And I don't remember how bad that interaction would have been, but she, the patient, was the one who had to catch that we have a potential interaction and shouldn't go forward with this particular med combo. Again, not at all uncommon. And then the final thing I'll say about that is that about maybe 4 or 5 months into a nightmare of this med transition, this person remembered me talking about some tests that look at the genomics, which is a fancy way of saying whether an individual has the genetics to metabolize certain categories of medication. And she asked me, she knew that I was big on this test and that I often advise clients and parents of the students with whom I worked when I was in my school counseling position to have that test done, because it really short circuits the process of trying a medication that isn't compatible with your system. You don't have the metabolic pathway through which that medication is metabolized in you is mutated and not working properly. Therefore, you're not a good candidate for that med. You're only ever going to get the negative side effects and not want to hang tough with it to get the benefits. None of her doctors recommended that she do that test. It's a very simple test. It's $300 out of pocket. So she and I talked about it. I was able to pull up some results and see that, yep, they did indeed, in addition to sedatives, hypnotics, antidepressants, anxiolytics, they did also have the test for seizure medications. So she, on a Friday, we had that discussion. On Monday, she had the test done. The results were in her hand by Thursday. And we were able to look at the results together and say, all right, looks like drug X, Y, and Z are on your not so good idea list. Let's stay away from those. But the question that I have is, why did it take me, who was not on her medical team, to bring this test to her awareness? She had been to the emergency room countless times. She had neurologists and other doctors working with her. it was quite clear that they weren't able to figure out an effective way to make this med transition without putting her through a hell of side effects. And yet at the end of the day, none of them said, hey, person, by the way, here's a test. It might help us get through the really awful part of this much more quickly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Why don't I also
Let us-
mention Laura Delano's book is called Unshrunk.
Sure.
If you Google Laura Delano and podcasts, there are many of them in which she's been interviewed by people about her experience, which is a pretty compelling story, much as Danielle's was. And the name of her foundation, I am forgetting, but if you Google Laura Delano, and I believe it's DELANO, it should come right up. She's pretty findable on the internet.
Awesome. Okay, shall we take a look back at the show, at the Zoom call, and
Yeah,
see
let's do it.
how we're progressing?
Morning, everybody. Excuse me. My name's Jacqueline Hartford. I'm a pharmacist by background, but I'm the program manager at the Mid-Atlantic Patient Safety Center.
Wonderful and welcome. So without further ado, we'll let's see. Share my screen here.
There were a couple of questions in the chat.
Oh, sure. Michelle, do you want to let us know the questions?
Well, what I saw is, do you think there is a supporting role that AI can play in detecting and relaying adverse events to pharma manufacturers? That was one of them.
Like a good question for you, Dr. Larson.
So we certainly are working with AI to summarize and extract data from medical records. I think that there is an opportunity, if it's recognized in a clinical visit, that AI could speed up and take some of the burden away from reporting. It's possible that it could be there to try to find issues, but so far that sort of detection of the unknown is tricky. What you have to do for AI, you have to what's called labeled data. So you'd actually have to have a whole big corpus of records and know which of those actually were an adverse event. And then you could train AI to like find those later on. But that corpus of labeled data is hard to find in healthcare.
So, Dr. Larson, would you agree that AI is a tool, not a replacement?
Yeah, absolutely.
I got a question on the pharmaceutical side, because a lot of people have always come on back and said something that, Bob, how come the pharmacy didn't pick up that this was the first time you were ever trying a psychotropic and that, you were starting at the highest dose possible? And they said somebody should have, the pharmacy should have flagged that right away and got back in touch with the doctor and say, hey, do you realize what you're doing to this young man? And you're asking me, I'm like, hey, I took the drug. I mean, I don't know how, I took what was prescribed. I didn't know, he asked me what my weight was.
Someone starts an antidepressant one week, they go back to the doctor the next week, they're showing symptoms of mania or psychosis. The doctor sees, oh, I got the diagnosis wrong. It's not depression. This is bipolar, or this is schizophrenia, or this is another psychotic disorder. And they go from SSRI to mood stabilizer to a sedative to now they're on lithium and game over. And so I was just wondering, rather than like, how much would it take to train the AI to do that? Like, I think a lot of us are using Claude or ChatGPT, and it's pretty sophisticated at this point. Could we just query how many patients of 1,000, say 1,000 patient records could we just query diagnosed with bipolar within a week of being prescribed or diagnosed with depression?
So you could do a research study on healthcare data and look for those diagnoses as they come after that prescription has been negotiated.
Okay, Susan,
That
you
would be
wanted to
more,
say something?
Yeah, only the word lithium triggered a thought, which is that there's two different types of lithium. Lithium carbonate is a pharmaceutical developed in a lab by man. Lithium carbonate does not cross the blood-brain barrier very well because it does not have a high bioavailability across the blood-brain barrier. It's typically prescribed in a very high dose with the expectation on the part of the doctor that a fraction will cross the blood-brain barrier and work its magic. And it does, and it helps the person in the brain health realm. However, that high dose of lithium will tax the person's kidneys. In a third of the people who take it long term, it will cause kidney failure, which is, if you're within the traditional medical system, considered to be irreversible, is ultimately treated with dialysis or a kidney transplant, and the person ultimately dies of kidney failure. One of the things that's really striking about that is that lithium orotate is, the lithium part is the same. The orotate is the different part. The orotate, and lithium orotate, by the way, is naturally found in spring water. In areas of the country that have a higher naturally occurring lithium content in the spring water, rates of depression, suicide, and homicide are lower. Lithium orotate is also sold as a supplement form. It's over the counter. It's available in a health food store, on Amazon, on VitaCost, on many Vitamin Shop, many sources from which it can be obtained. And it's available in a capsule form. Because the absorption and bioavailability is so much higher, you can give the person this much, which does not kill their kidneys, but they still get the brain benefit. The part that has always been particularly aggravating or whatever for me is that in 1975, the FDA approved lithium carbonate, the pharmaceutical, in 1974. Lithium orotate was available. It was on the market, and it was known that it would also help a person's brain in the same way without causing kidney damage. However, the information about that was typically not available. Pharmacy products are what doctors tend to be aware of. So my own mother was prescribed lithium carbonate, took it for 27 years, at which point her irreversible kidney damage was claimed to be significant enough that she needed to come off of it. And she died at 72 and might have lived longer had she never been on that drug. She was not bitter because it did help her. I'm bitter on her behalf.
I hear you. Yeah, I've got a similar story with my with one of my loved ones. But should we take a look back at the presentation, see where we are?
Sure, let's do it.
Here we go.
And patients report adverse events. And with those numbers, it cost the country $528 billion back in 2016. What's that number today?
Great question. And that brings us to our first session on pre-market standards, evidentiary thresholds, and implications for patients. My pleasure to introduce Dr. Diana Zuckerman. She's founder and president of the National Center for Health Research with a career spanning academia, federal policy, and public health. She previously served as a congressional science fellow, worked in the White House Senate and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and was a senior policy advisor in the Clinton White House, where she focused on improving health programs and medical product safety.
I'm very glad to be here. I'm hoping, yeah, there we go. Okay, so you heard a little bit about me, and I'll just say that my goal today is to give the context of where things start. When FDA approves a drug, how do they decide that it's safe and effective, and how is it that patients are being harmed, even though these drugs are supposed to be safe and effective? There's a lot going on between when FDA approves it and when people get have an adverse event that's really serious, or even if it's not so serious. So there's a lot of steps in between, but I'm going to start with the first step and happy to talk about with all of you about the other steps. Next slide, please. National Center for Health Research is a nonprofit public health think tank. We focus on the safety and effectiveness of medical and consumer products, and we do not accept funding from companies that make those products. However, my father worked for Johnson & Johnson his whole career, and I inherited quite a bit of stock from him. But I think my track record speaks for itself. I've been very good at being very critical of all pharmaceutical companies. Next slide. So FDA's drug approval criteria are that drugs must be, in their opinion, safe, and that means studied on humans, effective, and once they're seen to be safe and effective by the FDA, they must be inspected by the FDA to make sure that the drugs are being made the way they're supposed to be made. Next slide, please. So what does that mean to the FDA? Safe and effective means that the benefits outweigh the risks for most patients for a specific indication. So first of all, that's subjective. Who decides? What if it's benefits 60% of the patients, but just a little bit, but then 5% die? You know, how do you define that the benefits outweigh the risks? And also that it's a specific indication. So if the drug is approved for depression for adults, and how depression is defined, or if it's major depression or other kinds of depression, that is very specific. And yet, but drugs can be used off-label. Once they're on the market, once they're approved, any doctor can prescribe them, and it's perfectly legal. Next slide, please. So the approval process is one that I've studied for a few decades, and but from the outside generally. So the companies are paying often very impressive researchers to conduct the studies. They don't usually conduct them themselves. The FDA scientists then review the data, but they don't review the raw data. They look at the data that the company provides to the FDA, which are like similar to what you would see in a medical journal, but more detailed. But it's not patient by patient. You don't get to see exactly what's happening to each patient. And then, if it seems at all controversial, the FDA may hold a public advisory committee meeting. They haven't been doing this much lately, let me say the last year. There have been very few public meetings, but when they do have them, what happens generally, they're usually a day long. The company praises their product for 2 hours, giving all their data and their interpretation of their data. Then the FDA scientists agree or disagree, and usually they only have an hour, sometimes 2 hours, to say, you know, well, we agree with this part of it, but we weren't so sure about how they analyzed the data, or we're not so sure that they should have looked at all of these different variables at the same time. So they have, you know, they are looking at it in a very detailed way, but again, not looking at individual patients. And it's an honor system. I mean, they have to assume that the data that industry has provided is accurate. They don't have to assume it's analyzed the way they think it should be analyzed, but they have to assume that they're not making up data, you know. So, and then there's approximately 1 hour of public comments. Anybody can speak. I have done this, I'm sad to say, over 100 times, and other people on our staff have as well. And we usually only get 3 to 5 minutes. Most people who speak nowadays are patients. In the older times, 10 or 20 years ago, it was more likely to be doctors who were recruited by the company to speak. But nowadays, it's very, very often patients, and the patients are very powerful. And the patients are recruited by the company, and the patients are there to say, this is a great drug, or we really need this, or something like that. There may be physicians, there may be people representing medical societies also speaking, but usually they haven't looked, unless they participated in the studies, those people don't usually look at the data. They usually say, this is a terrible disease and we need more treatments, something like that. Next slide, please. So I think many of you know the gold standard and what used to
I can
be
still hear the
traditional.
folks talking. Thank you. The thing that I wanted to mention is that many people are unaware of some of the intricacies of the approval process. When the studies are being conducted, one of the things that to me seems a bit suspect is that if I and another person are in the study, let's say that I'm the one who's taking the real drug, the other person is taking the placebo, and it's an 8-week trial. If I drop out 4 weeks into the trial because the side effects that I'm experiencing are just too rough, I don't want to stick with this drug, my results are never entered into the study. Susan Moroto is coded as being non-compliant. That way, when the drug company presents to the FDA, they can say, well, only 2% of people experienced migraine headaches, gastrointestinal distress, whatever other side effects there might be. When in reality, once the doctors begin to prescribe it, the doctors will scratch their heads and say, very peculiar, because I feel like maybe more like 20% of people come in and speak to me. The other thing that I think is important to stress, and that so many people are unaware of, and I'm not sure I knew it until pretty recently, is that if, say, Pfizer has developed a product, the company that is in charge of evaluating both the efficacy and the safety of the product is Pfizer. The only one who ever sees the raw data from the study is Pfizer. The only one who is ever asked to interpret the data is Pfizer. And I think most Americans are pretty unaware of this. To me, it is sheer lunacy. It is a state of, why would you put the fox in charge of the hen house? And what I don't understand, because I'm naive, is that to me, it's a no-brainer that an entity ought to be set up, and this entity ought to have no financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry. And then it would be the job of this entity, in my idealistic worldview, that would be in charge of running the safety studies and studies, is this drug really efficacious at what it claims to be doing? Then the other piece that I would want is that nobody that is a part of this entity is allowed to have any financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry, period, full stop. Not just the company, the particular one, but because of smoke and mirrors and ways to rearrange things behind the scenes, if Susan Moroto had her way, they would be prohibited from having any financial ties to the pharma industry, which means that because it's easy to manipulate things and it's easy to set up shell companies and funnel money through so that a couple of transactions later, you can't tell that that's my money. We would need to establish people whose job it is to really delve into the financials and look at the financial investments and the money coming in of all the people who are a part of this entity that is evaluating the safety and efficacy of medications. And one more thing to say, Liam, before we go back to them, which is a lot of people don't know that for many pharmaceutical products, so for example, Bob's experience, Danielle's experience, the experience of Laura Delano, any of us, if we have an adverse reaction and we're really upset about it and we feel that there was negligence on the part of the company, that perhaps they knew before launching the product onto the market that it was going to cause harms and even fatalities. And let's all remember that Vioxx happened. And for those who don't remember, Vioxx was a drug that killed, I believe it was around 50,000 people. Even more alarming was that it subsequently came out in the company's internal records, I believe the company was Merck, that the company knew in advance of launching that product that there were going to be fatalities and more than just a few. But they did it anyway. One of the reasons in my belief that companies do it anyway is because the only penalty they are ever subject to is fines. So if the amount of my revenue is exceeding the amount of my fines, then it's just a matter of the cost of doing business. What I think might make a difference is if I, Susan Marotta, was personally liable and my family's fortune might get wiped out and I might have to sit my little rear end in jail, maybe then I would think twice about it. So if we look at what happened to the Sackler family, which was the family behind Purdue, which was the company that brought us the opioid epidemic, none of them, not one, was held personally liable. Instead, their company went bankrupt. Who cares? They still have private jets. They're still flying around. They're still going on vacation. There may be a little bit of taint to their reputation, but other than that, they are, as individuals, completely unscathed. And again, to me, when harm is done intentionally on such an epic proportion, what are we doing letting people walk away scot-free?
It's a sad truth of the way things are today. It's like, did they make the same evaluation when they were deciding about the Pinto, I believe it was?
Which one?
The automobile, the Pinto, the gasoline.
That's your department. I don't know anything about cars.
But they decided it would be more profitable to just pay out.
Yes. I have heard of this. Yep. And I think that's something that, what are we doing? I mean, if we know that money is easy come, easy go, and as long as I have more coming in than I have going out, it's not going to stop me from doing what I want to do, because my profits still exceed the amount of my fines. So if we could make people personally liable, and not for unintentional harms, but I'm talking about when it comes out through a company's own internal data, their emails, their whatevers, that they were well aware that their product was going to harm and kill. Could we please maybe consider, if I go kill somebody and you guys know about it, you're going to put me in jail as well. You should. Why are they allowed to do it? And we all just say, sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
It's a great question.
Thank you.
Shall we see what they're up to?
Yes, let's head back to them.
Let's head back to them. Okay.
Very meaningful, because the company's definition of mild or short term may be very different than a patient's. A very obvious example is when patients take an antibiotic and they get nauseous and they're vomiting. And that's not a serious adverse event, but do you want to be nauseous and vomiting for the next week even, let alone much longer period of time with some of these other drugs? So these summaries, and there's a growing literature in the medical research now about how when certain drugs are defined or described, I should say, as generally well tolerated, in some studies of other drugs that have exactly the same kind of adverse events aren't described that way. So it really depends on who's writing that article and what the peer reviewers allow and the editors. Next slide, please. So the big push at FDA for years now has been faster, faster. We need to be faster than Europe. We need to be faster than every other country in the world. We want to get our products on the market more quickly than anybody else. And there are several different pathways. I'm not going to go into them now, but I'm happy to talk about them. But the reviews to get things to the market more quickly by letting companies study biomarkers or other surrogate endpoints, and several surrogate endpoints that many of us think of as health endpoints, but aren't really, are things like cholesterol levels and bone mineral density and tumor shrinkage and even amyloid plaque on the brain for Alzheimer's. So yes, these are associated with and sometimes very strongly correlated with health outcomes, but not always. So, a person can have problems with bone mineral density and they take certain drugs and then their bone mineral density is improved, but they might still get fractures. And it doesn't necessarily mean that surrogate endpoint is that meaningful to many patients. I've already talked about tumor shrinkage for cancer, and amyloid plaque on the brain is another thing where people with Alzheimer's tend to have more amyloid beta plaques on their brain, but there are people with quite a bit on their brain that are perfectly, function perfectly well. And there's also ones, regardless. So you can't just measure these biomarkers and assume that they correlate exactly with health. Next slide, please. So why are they pushing for speed? Well, patient organizations are advocating for new treatments, and they are lobbying Congress and the FDA, often with support from one or more pharmaceutical companies, not always, but usually they wouldn't even know how to lobby. They're being trained, they're being flown in, et cetera. And Congress is advocating for innovation, and innovation is like the biggest word in Congress lately. And they say they're doing it on behalf of patients. They are often doing it on behalf of patient groups and on behalf of industry. But as a result, the pressure on the US government to approve drugs, particularly if other countries do, but even if they don't. And what I always say is the difference between us and the EU, the European Union, is that in the United States, once a product is approved by the FDA, pretty much Medicare is going to pay for it, and private insurance is going to pay for it. Whereas in Europe, they can approve a drug, but the national health plans won't necessarily pay for it unless they say it's better than other drugs that are cheaper, for example. We don't have that. The US does not require a new drug to be any better than an older drug, even though the new drug's going to cost maybe 10 times as much as the older drug. It doesn't have to be any better. And in fact, it doesn't necessarily have to be as good. It just has to be better than nothing. Next slide, please. So there are different pathways, and at this point, there are so many drugs getting some kind of priority or some kind of quicker pathway that reviewers are under constant other drugs that are to decide yes or no very quickly. And the staff shortages that have require a new drug administration any better than an older drug, even though the new drug made that cost. So it was already difficult before that, and a lot of pressure to get decisions quickly. There's something called user fees. I won't go into that unless people ask, but where the companies pay a certain amount of money to the FDA so that they can hire more staff, but with the condition that they must make decisions more quickly. They don't
Susan, you wanted to say
positive
something?
decisions.
I did want to say something. Thank you. So Diana Zuckerman was asking the question, why do we need to push for speed when it comes to getting pharmaceutical products developed? I think I would go back further in my thinking about the situation, which is that our medical system is very reactive rather than proactive. So let's take cancer as just one of many, many, many examples. We know a lot of what we can do to lower people's chances with the condition that they must. Are you able to mute them for me, Liam, so I'm not hearing them? Thank you. To lower people's chances of ever developing cancer. And it's things that are not sexy, and it's things that are not going to bring in a huge amount of money into anybody's pocket. Trying to get people moving, trying to get people eating a little more nutritiously, trying to get people sleeping, which is a harder request than you would think, given our devices and what we can do at 2 a.m. However, we spend, and I'm going to make the numbers up because I don't know, but I'm going to say that for every $1,000 that we spend trying to develop a pharmaceutical product to treat cancer, once it has developed in a person, maybe we spend $1 on prevention. And that is why, as a cranky old person, I will not give money to the American Cancer Society, because I'm not interested in developing drugs to treat a pretty bad disease once it exists, when there is a far, to me, more common sense approach, which is let's go back earlier. Let's get this person to the point where they never develop it in the first place. I will say with regard to autism, it's a complicated situation. I'm not going to claim to know everything, although I've given it a lot of thought. Here's what I'm going to say. In the fall, I attended a conference. It was a children's health conference. It was called the Moment of Truth. It was put on by Children's Health Defense Fund. At that conference, I met a super delightful 12-year-old. We were getting snacks at the same time. I'm a school counselor. I love kids. So I started chatting with this young man. He looked me in the eye. He couldn't have been more delightful. His dad was occupied in a conversation, but he went and grabbed his dad's business card and gave it to me and gave mine to the dad. This kid was indistinguishable from any neurotypical child that I've ever worked with. And I've worked with a lot in 30 plus years of clinical work. So later in the conference, I get talking to the dad and I said, you have a wonderful son there. He's just a delight to talk to. Dad tells me the story. And the story is that dad adopted that child as a 3-year-old out of the foster care system. And as a 3-year-old, he was nonverbal. He would have met the criteria for a pretty full-blown autism. The dad was not wired to go do therapies like ABA that cost a lot of money and that Medicare and Medicaid spend billions of dollars on, that do very little other than train a child how to respond in a more neurotypical way. This dad went at it in a more functional medicine way. He was a scientist himself, and he was clued in and tuned in to the world of alternative medicine and functional medicine. So he put the kid through all sorts of detoxification protocols, and I'm not sure because we didn't have long enough to get really into it. But all I can say is 9 years later, I would not have been able to distinguish or identify that that child had ever carried the label of autism.
Wow, powerful story.
And so it just kills me, Liam, that we pump all this money into therapies that aren't remedying the kid's presentation of autism. What they are doing is what you would do to a monkey. If you make eye contact with that person, I'm going to give you some M&Ms as a reward. So sure, you can train them into behaving as if they did not have autism, but they do still have autism. And while that may not be awful, I'm not saying that, there's many neurodiverse or people with neurodivergence who are wonderful and are making a huge contribution to the world. But what I am saying is if there is distress that's being caused because the person with that label is feeling like I'm not like all the other people, and I've heard kids express that, what's wrong with me? Other kids don't seem to react the way I do, the intensity of emotion. There's a way to get them to where they're not feeling like they're the oddball, but we're not doing that.
So true. Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I'm going to shut up because we've got people to listen to on the.
Okay, let's take a listen.
And many of them, and only 32% had meaningful benefits, and none of those were approved under accelerated approval. Next slide, please. This is another study, 330 post-market study requirements that FDA said they were requiring. 72% of them were late, and 45% of those that were late were accelerated approval confirmatory trials. Next slide, please. This is just one slide on devices, just to let you know it's even worse. 95% of medical devices do not go through clinical trials as part of benefits. And even if whether or not they go through clinical trials, they could have evidence of safety and effectiveness, but about 95% of them don't. Next slide. Last slide. As you know, FDA decisions really have an impact on life and death. The gold standards is basically non-existent for devices, and it's an endangered species for pharmaceuticals. Most studies are too small or too short-term to provide really good safety data on adverse events in particular. And industry and patients affiliated with industry are contacting the media, the FDA, and Congress to influence FDA decisions and to influence everything that we know about them. Because when the story comes out, when a new drug has been approved, you hear all the great things about it, and you don't hear very much about the adverse effects. And last slide, there I am.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Zuckerman. I think first we'll take any kind of comments or reactions from the panel or questions for Dr. Zuckerman, and then we can also have some discussion questions as well. And if anyone online has some questions, go ahead and type those into the chat now.
So as scary as all that is,
Yeah, I'm making friends and cheering people up wherever I go.
there are all
You
these
had an antidote,
I did.
Susan?
I did. So years and years and years ago, a person that I knew personally had a spouse who was working for the FDA. And the person explained it to me and said, everybody thinks the FDA's job is to evaluate whether a new device, product, medication, what have you, is safe before it goes on the market. And she said, that is not the FDA's job. And I said, all right, what's the FDA's job? And she said, it's the FDA's job to evaluate whether a new product, pharmaceutical device is as safe as what already exists on the market. And where that becomes really critical, it was explained in a really clear way to me in a wonderful documentary that I strongly encourage everybody to watch. Help me with the name, Liam. Del Bigtree. Hold on, that's Bob's. It's the Del Bigtree one. We'll come back to that. But anyway, so he explains it by way of looking at, if you wanted to look at whether vodka caused more car accidents than another substance. So you're going to give one group 10 shots of vodka, and you're going to assume that they're going to crash the car with regularity. You're going to give the other group 10 shots of tequila. Well, tequila is already approved and on the market, and the vodka people didn't crash the car with any higher rate than the tequila people. So now what we can say is vodka's looking good. It does not cause increased car accidents. True enough if you compare it to tequila. Not true enough if you were compare it to water, if you had people who were given 10 shots of water. So last night I attended a presentation by Dr. Aaron Seary, and he was talking about the same thing, that each and every vaccine, every single one that has ever been introduced onto the market only has as a safety comparison standard the other vaccines already on the market. But they were never studied going all the way back, all the way back, all the way back, all the way back. And one of the reasons that they were never studied is because when vaccines are developed, sometimes the rationale that gets presented when appealing to the FDA for approval is, well, we need it. And so we don't have time to do these full studies. This thing is going to prevent, name your disease, whooping cough, diphtheria, pertussis, what have you. So people aren't aware of that there is no safety study that was ever done on any of the vaccines that are on the childhood, the recommended schedule from the CDC. However,
the gold standard is the placebo-based.
One would think, yes, the gold standard is the placebo. So let's give Liam the drug, let's give me the placebo, and then let's look at us and see how we do. But that's not what's being done. What's being done is we're giving Liam, what's a newer vaccine, meningitis, and we're giving me measles, because that one's been around for a while. And we're saying that his meningitis vaccine didn't cause him to have any adverse reactions any more than I got from my measles vaccine. But what we never have compared is whether the measles vaccine, how are the individuals who received that vaccine doing 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, as compared to the individuals who never had the measles vaccine. So apparently the best thing that we have is a retrospective study. A retrospective study means that we can't control for all confounding variables, but what we can say, and this was done about, I think it was like 2011, 2012, 2010, somewhere in there, the Henry Ford Foundation, a very large retrospective study, an inconvenient study. That's the name of Del Bigtree's documentary, an inconvenient study. It is on YouTube, strongly recommend, an inconvenient study. So the Henry Ford Foundation decided to do a retrospective study. There was a very large number of children in the study. Half of the children were fully vaccinated. Half of the children were unvaccinated. Del Bigtree, who was the producer of the movie, went to the doctor, whose name I'm not remembering, in advance of the study being performed, and said to this doctor, can we just agree on one thing? Can we agree that no matter what the results of the study, you will publish? And the doctor said, yes, of course. That's the whole point. You do a study, you publish your results, because I think the doctor was wanting to demonstrate that vaccines are safe. So they did the study, and the results came back entirely opposite of what the doctor expected. In the group of children that was vaccinated, mortality was significantly higher. There were more dead children than there were in the other group. As well, the rates of everything from asthma, allergies, autism, anxiety, depression, autoimmune conditions, ADHD, other neurological impairments, Tourette's, you name it, was about what you would expect, like commensurate with our current society, in the group that was vaccinated. In the control group, where the children were not vaccinated, some of those diseases, disorders, whatever you're going to call them, they had zero. And so here's now what's really interesting. The doctor then says, just kidding, I'm not going to publish. So Del Bigtree goes to him and he records the conversation secretly. And he says, riddle me this, why are we not publishing? The one thing that you agreed on was that it would be published. And the doctor says, yeah, I did. So he admits it, he's like, I did. But so Del said, so why not publish? And Del asked a question that I really appreciated that he asked. He said, is there anything that could be improved upon in this study? Any methodological flaws, financial conflicts of interest, anything that could be done to make the study better? And the doctor says, no, the study's great. There really isn't anything you could do to tweak it to make it any better. So Del says, then why are we not publishing, which is what we agreed to do? And the doctor says, just quite frankly, not going to do it. It would be career suicide. And then the doctor said, I don't want them, and I believe by them, he meant the medical establishment, maybe the government, who knows, to do to me what they did to Robert Malone and Peter McCullough and other doctors who had the audacity to come out and say, I think we might be having a problem with the COVID vax. I'm seeing a lot of people keel over dead. I'm seeing people having strokes. I'm seeing people having myocarditis. I'm seeing people have all types of things that appear to me that they might be vaccine injuries. And I think we ought to slow down on this vax. And so the doctor says, on record, you can go on the movie and watch it. And he says, I'm not going to do it. He says, I'm an older guy. I'm at the end of my career and I just want to ride it out quietly. I don't want to go out in a flame of smoke and being, ostracized, ridiculed and all of that. And Del Bigtree says, so really? He's like, so you're harming kids by not releasing the study, but you're not going to do it because you're worried about your reputation being tarnished. And the doctor says, correct. So I'm not making any of it up. Del Bigtree's not making any of it up. It's all there in the movie, An Inconvenient Truth on YouTube. Strongly, emphasis on strongly, recommend you watch it.
Inconvenient Truth or Inconvenient?
You're right, Inconvenient, you're right. There is another one called An Inconvenient Truth. The one that I would like people to go and watch is called An Inconvenient Study, because it's inconvenient for the medical establishment that this study was done and that the results, it wasn't just that the kids in the non-vax group were doing a little bit better, they were doing leaps and bounds and light years better. In a way, it makes a lot of sense. People who are old like me and Liam, we didn't get so many vaxes. We got, I believe it was 8, lump sum total 8 between birth and 18 years old. Children now, the slogan is 55 by 5. That doesn't mean 55 vaxes, but it does mean 55 doses of however many vaxes by 5 years old. And then by the time a child is 18, if they have done every single thing that was on the CDC's recommended list up until recently when Bobby Kennedy went in and caused a ruckus, I think the number was something like 72. So in Liam's and my age group, there's a whole lot of things that are super prevalent today that we just didn't have. When I went to the cafeteria, there was no peanut-free table. I never knew a child who had a food allergy of any kind. We didn't have What else didn't we have, Liam? Help me. We didn't have kids with autoimmune disorders. We didn't have
obesity.
We didn't have obesity. We didn't have kids running around exhausted all the time. I was a middle school counselor for 8 years. Can't tell you how often a kid would say, I'm tired. I would explore all the variables. And my litmus test was, how do you feel when it gets to be a break? You're on summer break, you're on winter break, you're on spring break. You've had as much sleep as your little body can have. Your mom didn't wake you up. Then are you still tired? And I've had kids say to me, yeah, I'm always tired. I know that's not normal. I've been there. I know it's also fixable. I know that 30, 40 years ago, or however many decades it was since I was a kid, that wasn't normal. I hear it all day long from kids now. I didn't hear it all day long when I was a kid.
Yep. Me too.
One more thing before we go. I am not saying that vaccine.
Absolutely. Continue.
Oh, I am not saying that vaccines are the only contributing factor, because I don't think that they are. I think that radiation, electromagnetic frequencies, the plethora of chemicals that we're exposed to, including glyphosate, which is the pesticide that's in Roundup that began to be administered to our food supply in the 90s. I think all of those things are a contributing factor, as well as societal stress. Kids are carrying a lot around that. They are, I wasn't seeing murders happen in real time on my computer screen when I was a child, because guess what? There was no computer. And when there was, it was at school and we didn't have one in the house. So I'm not saying they're the only factors. I do think that all of them, in conjunction with a whole lot of other things, have gotten us to where we are, where our kids are very sick. Very sick. There was one more thing I was going to say, but I'm forgetting it. So I think I'm ready to go back to unless you had something to say, Liam.
I'm good. Let's go back to the panel discussion and see what's going on.
Trial, you're going to have two groups, and they'll show, well, both groups had generally the same amount of women, generally the same amount of demographic or ethnicity, age, etc. But what about, I think one of the biggest drivers of variation in drug response is differences in genetics. What if we know we do the pathway summary, the pathway kind of analyses in some of the earlier phase trials. So to some extent, we do typically know how that drug is going to be broken down into active metabolites or toxic metabolites. So wouldn't it be great if we knew that, hey, this specific drug is processed through a cytochrome enzyme in the liver that we can test for to see if that patient has a variant, and that was included in the clinical trial groups. I've never seen anything stratified that way, but I guess that's my question for the group is, are current clinical trial comparison groups sufficient to detect meaningful safety risks? So that's just a question for everybody.
Yeah, and I would just add age is a big one, because metabolism really changes as you age. And yet most drugs really are not tested on very many people, even over 65. And now we have a lot of people over 75 and even over 85. And it's, the metabolism is very, very different. FDA knows this, everybody knows this. But of course, older people tend to have other illnesses and they don't get included in clinical trials because in addition to having cancer, they have heart disease, or in addition to having heart disease, they've had cancer, or, whatever it is. They have too many things going on at once, but those are often the people who are going to take that drug. Certainly cancer tends to be older patients, and many other diseases, heart disease, many other diseases are mostly older patients.
Yeah, and there are whole populations that we're reluctant to do research on, like children and pregnant women, for very good reasons, but they end up with illnesses, they end up potentially needing treatments. We have to try to extrapolate from healthy adults into these other groups that, if you're a pregnant woman with cancer, there's hard decisions to make because a lot of the treatments haven't been studied in pregnant women by design, but maybe you'll die if you don't get it.
So is that data better looked at in the pre-market phase, or once, do we have kind of data available at scale where we can do those types of analyses more post-market? Or
there's definitely health services research data that you can look longitudinally at claims and death and other outcomes, and many of those are published studies in a like large scale post-mortem way.
Yeah. Do people here know about the Sentinel project at FDA? Is that something that you're aware of? Yeah, so that was supposed to be an early warning, not so early necessarily, warning system of, when a lot of people, when you've got millions of patients with millions of patient years, and you can look at what are the adverse events that are happening to these patients. And yet this system, which costs a lot of money and which the FDA has been doing for, I don't know, 15 years or more, has resulted in, I think, one product maybe being taken off the market and just a few with label changes. I mean, it really hasn't been used. And I can tell you, years ago, I met with the head of CEDAR, the Center for Drug Evaluation, because I was on the board of the Reagan-Udall Foundation, which is a foundation to support the FDA. And so she would meet with the board members, and at one point she was giving a talk on Sentinel Project, and I asked about, well, what has the result been? And she said, well, we get a lot of signals, but they don't amount to anything because they're false positives. And I said, well, how do you know they're false positives? You're doing biopsy, how do you know it's a false positive? And she said, well, if we can't figure out what the mechanism of action is, we figure it's a false positive. And I thought the whole point of this was to look at real patients and see what happens to real patients, not to just focus on mechanism of action that we already know about.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to mention that, maybe part of this is also to connect with others who are doing similar work, particularly post-approval safety studies, both here and internationally. So, the whole International Society for Pharmacoepidemiology tries to look at post-marketing surveillance and the data, drug utilization studies and all that. And then in Europe, they've got NCEP. NCEP actually have the registry of post-approval safety studies that are ongoing. So it doesn't mean that these things are being addressed sufficiently, but I think there are work in those areas.
A couple of hands up.
I was going to ask a question as far as, is that what you were describing before, is that a regulatory problem that we're having? I mean, and what I mean by that is you look at our wealth system, which is highly very regulatory, and it's all about delivering ROI. And do we have a health system that is delivering ROH, return on health?
Right. Well, I can say that, just to be simplistic about this, we have an adverse event reporting system that is mostly voluntary.
Right.
And for many years, and this may still be somewhat true, it's on paper. You have to actually look for it. In other words, you don't have, even with AI, to my knowledge, you don't have a system that says, oh, look at all these people, all these adverse event reports show us that people of a certain age taking a certain drug tend to have a certain adverse event. And AI could certainly be extremely helpful for something like that. I would compare it to the fact that I'm pretty sure that my local supermarket, if I return a can of tomato sauce because it was spoiled, they will know how many other people returned that kind of tomato sauce. It's all automated. They already know what it is. They don't have to look for a study of it. And FDA has never had that. Never had that. They've never had an automatic system that says, oh, look at that. You have to ask the question. And there are too many questions to ask. So it is a regulatory problem. It used to be considered a problem of, bad computers, not inadequate systems at FDA. And every time they got more money to change their system. By the time they changed it, it was, already out of date. But it also is a failure of, the whole way of looking at things. If you don't have some kind of, how is it that supermarkets can do this, but FDA can't? I think is a good question.
Is it a question of ability or is it a question of will? Sorry to interrupt you over there. A question came in that I think is relevant, and excuse me for interrupting. We can turn right back to you in a moment. The question was, does the FDA's accelerated approval pathways compare to Switzerland? Do you look at Swissmedics, the equivalent of FDA in Switzerland, is more cautious approach that could provide better safety? But along those same lines, you consider the fact that ADEs on long-time drugs aren't reported. And so contrast that 40, 50-year-old drugs with adversities aren't reported. Does speed really, would speed really matter in that context if you think about it? Bob and I were at a Georgia Medical Board meeting here on the day that Georgia received $638 million in damages for opioids, 30 years after the fact. So the question about speed versus the question about reporting adversities on existing drugs really do go hand in hand.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It is often a question of will.
Susan, you had something to add?
I did. When she asked how our process compares to Switzerland, where shall we start? If you compare our process on just about anything related to health as to what other developed countries do, we are the outliers. So whereas other countries, for example, burned mercury in fillings in teeth, off the top of my head, I'm going to say at least 20 years ago, although that's not a recently researched fact, but somewhere in that neighborhood, it's still being used here. Completely unclear to me why. There are perfectly good fillings that can be made without mercury. What we do know is that when mercury is in a filling, a dental filling in a cavity, every single time that person eats, drinks, I guess that's it, eats or drinks, tiny little microscopic amounts are released into their system. The mercury is here. The brain is here. We've only got 2, 3, 4 inches to go. We know that mercury is neurotoxic. It is so toxic that when a dentist, and I would advise anybody who's going to have this done, only do it at the office of a biological dentist who does it under safe containment situation. That dentist, when he or she removes a mercury filling, cannot put it in the regular trash can. It has to go into the biohazard trash can. And yet it's
did not know that.
Put into a person's mouth, knowing that they're going to be continually exposing themselves to minute bits of it. It is also okay to put it in a vaccine. It is further okay to inject that vaccine into a pregnant woman. So her fetus is now being exposed to mercury, which is neurotoxic. And we have more and more children being born with brain health issues. Our autism rates have soared. I do not believe it is only due to better detection and reporting. And I believe most of us who have been around long enough can look around us and see we got more neurotypical people that I'm passing on the street, in the coffee shop, in the post office, in the wherever, than we did 2, 3, 4 decades ago. And yet, as Bobby Kennedy said, when he was working very hard to alert all of us to the dangers of mercury in fish, nobody called him anti-fish. And in fact, as largely as a result of his good work as an environmental lawyer, we developed protocols for pregnant women. I know when I was pregnant, which was one baby in 99 and the other in 2002, I was given a list. You can eat this fish, this column, as many times a week as you want. This one, maybe once, twice a week, and we're really not having you go here. And the reason they didn't want me to go to this column over there was because of the mercury. So let me get this right. I shouldn't be eating things that have a high level of mercury because I might screw myself up, but more importantly, I might screw up this new human that hasn't yet come into the world. Okay, so we're all in agreement about that, right? Mercury for gestating babies, bad. unless it comes in the form of a vaccine, in which case then it's highly desirable. It just doesn't compute for me. It also doesn't compute why, if all Bobby Kennedy has done is say, can we get the mercury out of the vaccines and maybe the thimerosal too, which is another compound that's neurotoxic? He's an anti-vaxxer. I don't think the anti-vax is the appropriate term, partly because he got vaxxed, partly because he vaxxed his children. I propose, and I've been spouting it off to whoever will listen to me, that the terminology that is more appropriate, but also less inflammatory and divisive, vax selective. And that's what I am. I did not decline all vaxes for those 2 children that were born in 99 and 2002. I declined some. So for example, when the doctor in the hospital, my baby was less than 24 hours old because she went home with me at 24 hours old. When the doctor in the hospital came in and said, hey, we're going to give the hepatitis B shot, I said, hold the phone. No, you're not. Hepatitis B is acquired through sexual intercourse and IV drug use. And I said, you really think I'm that negligent? I'm going to be taking her to the, the brothel and signing her up as a 4-year-old prostitute. You think I'm going to, take her over to the, I don't know the name of the den or the flop house where you shoot up with IV drugs. But I said, I'm not enrolling her in that preschool. I'm enrolling her in the one where the 4-year-olds don't have sex and do IV drugs. So why do I need it? Why can't she have it at 10, 12 when she's headed into puberty, when she might actually engage in those activities and need the protection? And furthermore, at that time, the hepatitis B vaccine was brand new. So I pointed out, we don't know how long that immunity is conferred for. Durability, I think, is the name of that. How long before it begins to wear off and you need a booster? So why are we going to give her something when she's 24 hours old? Her little immune system has not even had a full 24 hours to get used to, hey, here I am on the planet. I got to breathe for myself. I got to eat. I got to regulate my own body temperature. A lot of lights and noises going on. My whole world just got turned upside down. But we think it would be a great idea to give you a vaccine just in case you have sex, I don't know, when you're 3 months old.
Yeah, it's totally absurd. And the visual context that you make, Mercury's here and the brain is here. I never thought about it, but just the location is so short. Plumbers work with lead, pipes back in the day, and they would, over time, will suffer the effects of lead poisoning in some cases. But you're so right. If the mercury's here and the brain is here,
right? Yeah, and once it goes in your bloodstream, anything that gets in your bloodstream, it's like almost instantaneous. It's throughout your whole body. So anything you give to a mom, it's not the case, as was thought back long ago, that the placenta acts as a barrier and keeps out any harmful substances. No, we know whatever goes into that mom, because she ate it, she drank it, it was given to her in an IV, it was given to her in a needle in her arm, whatever it was, within seconds, the baby too is marinating in the amniotic fluid. And that's what it is.
And marinating, I think, is a good word. Right. She's filled in the amniotic fluid. She's just surrounded by whatever the mother puts, in their body. Shall
right.
we
one more
join
point
the
before we
presentation?
go back to them, which is
sure.
When we talk
Absolutely.
about, sorry, Liam. I'm sorry, Liam, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No,
you sure?
Continue.
When we talk about vaccines and babies, the other thing that alarms and worries me that I think perhaps is not a part of the common dialogue around the subject is that little baby could be 8, 10, 12 pounds big. So maybe it's okay for me, as somebody who weighs somewhere upwards of 130 pounds, and we're not going to say my exact number because it's higher than it should be right now, but to give me a vial like this, that's one thing, because I'm a bigger person. It's going to disperse. You give a baby who is only 10 pounds it's like giving me 80 vials of that substance. And we're going to load them up all at the same time. Yeah, it's madness to me, utter madness.
Yeah,
So
and
like
like you
with my
say,
kids,
you're
with the
not.
few that I did want, I spaced them out. I said, go ahead, you're going to give one this week and I'll schedule a nurse's appointment in 2 weeks for the next. We're not giving 3 vaccines in a day, not doing it. I was lucky enough to
And like
have yeah, let's go back to the folks. Yep.
well, like you say, you're not being vaccine adverse. You're being vaccine
Back
selective. You're
selective. Say it with me,
selecting
everybody. Back
to
selective.
selective, yeah, to bring the vaccines, selective vaccines over time rather than just, you know, firebomb the immune system, all at once.
Well, let me say
So
one more thing, Liam, before you go, because
sure, absolutely, absolutely.
language is important, and language conveys a lot of nuance and a lot of subtleties. When you label one side of the camp pro-vaccine and the other side anti, you have set up a polarization. You have two people who are on opposite sides in a war, and that's what we have right now. Like I said, I don't think the language over here is accurate I mean, maybe there are some who are against all vaccines, but I think a lot of us are vax selective. We just want to know, what's the odds of my baby acquiring this disease? If my baby acquires this disease, how bad is it going to be? We talking death? We talking permanent blindness? All right, talk to me. I want to hear about your vaccine. If we're talking, things that a lot of us had as children and we lived to tell the tale, I think the other thing that perhaps people are not thinking about is that the immune system is there for a reason. And the immune system is there to fight predators, invaders, pathogens. It wants to protect us. If you remove everything and you set up a situation where the routine childhood illnesses that used to be the mechanism by which a child strengthened his or her immune system, well, now I've got an immune system that isn't happy. It's not doing its job. Darn it, it wants to protect Susan Moroto, and there's nothing coming in to protect me against, but there's a peanut. Surely that peanut is my enemy, and I'm going to go full on and I'm going to attack it. And we know that there is some truth to this. We know that the hygiene hypothesis, is a part of things, that if you sanitize all of us out of existence, then that's not good. You're messing with the biome. And I think by the same token, I had a friend who had her children when she was in Asia. She was living overseas with her husband for a period of time. And I guess in Asia, they had a slightly different view of things. And she said to me, every time I take the baby in because the baby's sick, the doctor gets happy and says, this is wonderful. She's building up her immune system. Yeah, she is. And so I don't think the goal ought to always be to prevent exposure to every single germ, virus, bacteria, pathogen that comes along, because then I think you've got an immune system that weakens because it does not know how to do its job.
Absolutely. And we all have immune systems, I mean,
yeah.
And and they try to bombard us with so much stuff so early. So
and what I'm not clear on, I think for so many people, the goal when they have children, when you're a mom and you're doing the play dates, you have to give the call. We got sniffles over here. We're having green snot. You want to play with us or not? A lot of moms are like, nope, no, thank you. No green snot. Not dealing with that at my house. Not sure that's the best plan. Because again, if you protect your child from everything, here's an interesting fun fact. Your rate of having allergies, and I mean like seasonal type as an adult, are lower if 4 conditions are met in your childhood, and all of them have to do with germ exposure and filth. Living on a farm, being in daycare. I don't remember the others, sorry. But the point is, the kids who are told to go run around in the dirt, eat a little dirt while you're at it, maybe we're washing hands with soap and water, but we're not using the antibacterial stuff all the time. Those kids, for whatever reason, and I'm like, don't shoot the messenger, they have a statistically lower chance of developing allergies as an adult. And if you're going to use sanitizer, then can we please use the one that is just alcohol and aloe vera gel? You do not need triclosan, which is a chemical ingredient which is known to be, I believe it's an endocrine disruptor and a carcinogen. So if you're just looking to sanitize, you can buy the chemical-free kind, or just take some rubbing alcohol, take some aloe vera gel, dump them in a bowl. There you go. You got hand sanitizer.
That's an awesome point. I like this idea of just alcohol, aloe vera.
Aloe vera gel.
Aloe vera
I
in the
went to my kids' elementary school because they had sanitizer in every classroom. Okay, fine. If you want sanitizer, have sanitizer. But what I said to the principal is, why can't we have the one without triclosan? And I showed him the data that it messes with the reproductive system, and we're having epic amounts of infertility now, way more than we used to. And it's a carcinogen. So is there a reason that we're trying to give the kids cancer when we're looking for them not to spread the snots to the other kids?
Absolutely. Awesome. Awesome points. Let's get back and see what they're doing at the presentation.
Viral vector, you can't have a different one. So if you have one that's not effective and later on one's approved that is effective, too bad for you, because you just can't get it.
Derek, and then we'll take Danny online.
So you identified a really great point, which is the patient advocacy groups. And so NAMI, great example of this. Mental Health America, wonderful example of this. You can go to their website, and it's a smorgasbord of corporate donations from pharmaceutical companies who recently the organization actually signed on a letter opposing a bill in Congress that required written consent to the VA for psychiatric medications. Joined the American Psychiatric Association, of course, shocker. But would it make sense, because we've identified this as a problem, to have an outright ban on pharmaceutical donations to nonprofit patient advocacy groups, or maybe having a certain percentage of their profits annually go into a fund that is then figure out a way, God forbid it would be corrupted, but have that fund basically be distributed to nonprofits across the entire country, where it's not Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Lilly Foundation directing where their money goes to the trade group representing their interests versus the actual patients. So the kind of question is, would we want to ban, would it be possible to ban corporate pharmaceutical donations to nonprofit advocacy groups, patient groups, or create a separate fund where a certain amount of their profits go into that fund and those are donor-directed fund of some sort? But
There was,
just like, how do we get around?
there was a bill to make it public, even, and we couldn't even get that passed. But you know that the idea that if a nonprofit takes money from, a health nonprofit takes money from a pharmaceutical company, or whichever companies they take from, should be plastered everywhere. And I can tell you that this has really changed over time, because usually in the past, these companies would have a web page that say, thanks so much to our corporate donors. Now you have to look at who is sponsoring their gala or their luncheon or something like that. You can't even find it. Maybe you can find it in, page 42 of their annual report. It's hidden. They used to be proud of it. Now they know not to be so proud of it, but they still have to thank their corporate sponsors.
Is that a lobbyist issue?
Sure. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by, is it a lobbyist issue? The bill didn't pass, or that bill?
Yeah, as far as.
Yeah, sure. They don't want it to pass. You think the Alzheimer's Association wants that to pass? They got millions of dollars from the company that made Aduhelm, the first new Alzheimer's drug, which is no longer on the market because it didn't work and it caused brain bleeds and brain swelling. Yeah. But Alzheimer's Association and another group got a lot of money, put out ads, lobbied Congress to say, don't you care about Alzheimer's patients? Medicare should pay for this drug, even though the FDA, said they're not sure it works, but they approved it, so Medicare should pay for it. Yeah.
Looks like a sustainability program, doesn't it? Sick care sustainability. Jacob, could we open up Danny's mic and let her ask a question?
Let's hear from Danny, and then we can move into our next session.
Thank you so much, Diana, for what you shared. It was really informative. So I just wanted to quickly ask, given the growing number of patient reports describing persistent, actually, quite frankly, permanent sexual dysfunction, cognitive impairment and emotional blunting that can last long after stopping SSRIs, which with such experiences documented over decades. What factors do you think may explain the slow pace of formal regulatory recognition or updating to the drug labeling to better inform and warn patients about these potential risks? And also, to what extent do you feel the long-term brain effects, especially like during treatment and after stopping, have actually been studied in a meaningful way in regards to antidepressants? If there's like long-term safety research and, how the brain really changes over time in response to them, and if there's any real studies looking at this.
This is an issue of great interest to me, and I don't know of much in the way of research that's been published in, at least in reputable, prestigious journals. I mean, I think one of the other problems that we have is that if it's not published in JAMA or the New England Journal of Medicine, the study is not going to get in the New York Times. And a lot of these, the peer reviewers may not like a study that shows certain things. And I've been a peer reviewer, and I can tell you that, and I've also published in medical journals, and I've had things, not accepted because there was clearly one of the reviewers that didn't like what I was saying, and it didn't matter what the research showed. So it is a problem to get this information out to the public in a way that, that people hear and know about. And certainly, look, members of Congress are not scientists for the most part. There's hardly any physicians or scientists in Congress, but they're getting a lot of money from the other side, and they believe the other side. Whoever the other side is often patient groups now. Pharma has learned the most effective way to lobby for their points of view is to have the patient groups do the lobbying. And they're very good at it. And I can tell you, I'm having talked to congressional staff who say, my boss agrees with you, but he does not want the blowback. He doesn't want people saying, so-and-so, my congressional representative doesn't want to help Alzheimer's patients or cancer patients or people who are depressed.
Yeah, and I think we should acknowledge, though, that there are plenty of drugs that have black box labels on, the product, and that information, to Brett's point, is not always getting to the patient. So I think that's one of the lower hanging fruit opportunities, is a systematic approach to ensuring that the key information is provided to patients, almost like a checklist. And I've seen that in, there's a community oncology group that has these chemo checklist guidelines. So they helps oncologists go through every single thing they need to tell the patient, and that could be documented. And I think that's even something we could put in our electronic health records. Was it documented when they get prescribed this for the first time, that they understand the risks?
Yeah, and FDA can require a checklist, a patient checklist, like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And this, the patient has to sign.
So additional REMS specifically, or is it?
Well,
Yeah, REMS programs.
REMS program, but other things. It doesn't even have to be REMS programs, but usually at the last minute, the FDA kind of folds and says, but each company can do their own patient checklist. And what I've seen often is the information you want in there is there, but the checklist has gone from being 2 pages to being 40 pages, and nobody's going to read that.
Hi.
Did you have something to add?
I sure did. Couple of things. So one is going back to when I think it was Diana Zuckerman had asked how we compare to Switzerland. I started down a road, but I got detouring on the Mercury. I'd like to point out that Europe also is ahead of us in terms of everything from their air is cleaner, their water is cleaner, they're not where we are with the electromagnetic frequency situation. And by that, what I mean is every time you up it from 3G to 5G, we are exposed to a whole lot more radiation. And the data that I have read suggests that we are exposed to something like a quintillion times more than our grandparents or great-grandparents were. That too, I think, is a part of why we have such high rates of chronic illness in kids. With regard to chemicals and pesticides, I believe that I believe it was genetically modified ingredients were banned in Europe, I'm going to say a decade ago, but again, I've not fact checked myself recently on that. In this country, we made an effort to label products, to just share information and to say on a product label, some of the ingredients that are in this product were made using genetically modified ingredients. And guess what? That was not acceptable. So if you apply the concept of informed consent to food, I bet there are people who don't want to be eating GMO products, but aren't aware that the very item that they're picking up off the shelf has GMO products in it because the label doesn't state it. I would also like to say that maybe not all, I've had people say, well, why is it so bad to have genetically modified products? It might not be. It might not be a bad idea if you're just going to cross a Granny Smith apple with a Macintosh and see what you get. The point is that most of our genetically modified food was genetically modified in such a way that it would withstand applications of Roundup. Roundup is a weed killer. It's a pesticide. Or is it a pesticide? Is it an insect killer, Liam, or just a...
It's a weed killer. It works by blocking an enzyme in the way the weeds develop.
Correct. So in other countries, in other developed countries like Switzerland, the European countries, England, France, Spain, you name it, they years ago said, we're not having it. We're not having that product, Roundup, that contains glyphosate, which is a known carcinogen and a known endocrine disruptor. We're not having it in our food supply. In this country, we not only have it in abundance in our food supply, but we refuse to label it so that the average consumer who's not willing to do a little extra homework and figure out where am I going to get the food that does have it, where am I going to get the food that doesn't, so I can make my own informed choice. If you want glyphosate, I don't have a problem with it. Go have at it. I don't want it. And I am willing to put in a little legwork on research. The other thing that I wanted to say is at some point, something was mentioned about donors. I would encourage everybody to go look at the websites. I believe it was the FDA's website, had a very interesting list of donors that included a lot of companies that will be quite familiar to you. Merck, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, help me, Liam, with other names of big pharmaceutical companies. It's all right there. The conflicts of interest on a financial level are not being hidden from us. And yet so many of us are just going like, can't cope, don't talk to me about it. I'm just going to eat my Oreos and be happy. And again, if that's what you want to do, fine. But the problem is we are paying a hefty price. And we can even just talk about the financial price in treating everybody's chronic health conditions. Maybe if we put a minute amount of money into removing some of the toxins from the food supply, maybe we could delay somebody getting their chronic condition by 10 years, which not only will they have a better quality of life, so it's a more humane thing to do, it's going to save us money. It's going to save health insurance companies money. So there's that. The other thing that I wanted to say, Alzheimer's was mentioned, and the amyloid plaques. What I have read suggests that whereas there was a point where it was thought that amyloid plaques were a causative factor in Alzheimer's, the newer thinking is not so much, that the amyloid plaques may be formed by the brain as a protective mechanism against whatever the causative factors are. So that reducing the amyloid plaques might actually be really a bad idea. Also, sort of once again, we have the situation where we are so happy to pump millions of dollars into research to develop drugs that do not treat or reverse Alzheimer's or Lewy body or Parkinson's or anything else. What they may do, and it's arguable, is slow the progression. However, there are protocols out there that claim that they can reverse progression. So for people who are interested, on Amazon, there is a book by Dale Bredesen, Bredes, maybe O-N or E-N, and it is called The End of Alzheimer's. And he has a protocol that he calls the RECODE protocol. It is basically a functional medicine approach for the brain. which is really no different than a functional medicine approach for the body. So I'm not going to say it's easy. It is labor intensive, and a person would have to change their lifestyle, their habits, their diet, their everything to a great degree. But the claim of that particular physician is that he has treated, I don't remember the number of patients off the top of my head, and has found that he can reverse the symptoms. So those who were showing mild to moderate cognitive decline after being compliant with his regimen, protocol, advice, and so forth, were able to get themselves to the point where they no longer had cognitive decline. I believe it, and the reason I believe it is because I had cognitive decline early at the ripe old age of 30, 35, 40. I was a hot mess of cognitive decline due to all kinds of things. And many thousands of dollars in functional medicine doctors later, I feel not that bad most days cognitively. So I do believe that it more than likely is reversible. Well, why don't we ignore that and instead spend a whole lot of money developing drugs that I don't even know if they do slow the progression. My dad was on them. He had Lewy body dementia. I'm not sure I saw any slowing. I mean, his process seemed pretty speedy to me. Diagnosed in maybe 2004 or 5, dead by 2009. And not great things. By the end of things, not so verbal, not so able to feed himself, all of that. And there was one more thing I wanted to say. I mentioned something about studies. So because I am wired the way I'm wired, when people in my life have medical conditions, I go hunting. And I have mentioned that my mom died of kidney failure. So I went ahead and I looked, because I know if you go to a nephrologist, which is the doctor who specializes in care of the kidneys, they will tell you there's nothing we can do to treat your kidney failure. We can monitor it. So all that means is we're going to do blood work periodically, and I'm going to say either, yay, Liam, you're holding steady, or sorry, Liam, you're down a notch. Your kidney disease has progressed from level 1 to level 2, and then it goes to 3. And then when you're at 4 is when you need either dialysis or a transplant, or you die. However, when I looked up on PubMed, there are things. There is evidence that grounding mats improve kidney function. There is, and if you don't know what those are, well, I will show you mine. This is a grounding mat. This is a grounding mat. It's just what it says, a mat. And it plugs into an outlet in the wall. It does not plug in where the prongs are for an electric cord. It plugs into the little itty bitty tiny hole underneath of it, which for the electricians out there, which I am not one, is called the ground. That it is not safe from an electrical standpoint to put electricity or wiring into a building unless it is grounded. And I'm not electrician-y enough to know what that really means, but what I do know is it's a good thing. And you get
it's like an electrical overflow valve, like a gutter.
You do it because you can explain that better than I. So go for it.
Yeah, and so it's grounded. It's hooked to the ground.
Right, it's grounding. So it's the same. So we have electricity in our bodies. We have polarity, and we get electrons from the ground if we touch the actual earth with our actual bare feet or bodies. If you put yourself on pavement, you are not going to get the electrons from the ground. If you put yourself in shoes that have leather soles, like people had, maybe 100 years ago, and you are walking on grass or earth or mud or dirt, you will get electrons because the leather is conductive. Go ahead, Liam. You were going to say something?
So right now you're grounded.
I am, absolutely.
That's outstanding. So
Yeah,
your feet,
because
your feet are on that pad. That pad is connected to the wall, and it's through the grounding port in the electrical outlet.
Yep. So I've got a son-in-law who's an electrician, and he said, Susan, I hate to tell you, but you're actually not grounded, you're bonded. And I don't really care what I am. All I know is it seems to help. So
does it seem to help?
And they're not expensive. It was maybe $100, earthing.com.
Wow. That's fascinating.
And I want everybody to think about the fact that you feel better when you're at the beach. And yes, we all love the beach because it's fun and it's relaxing, and the sun and the wind and the waves. But a lot of us walk barefoot on the beach. And when you're walking barefoot on the beach and your little feet are just in that shallow part of the water, that water, boy, are you conducting. So you are getting electrons into your little system like nobody's business. And years ago, I saw a doctor who was into all of that, and he had a little gizmo, and he could measure at different points in the body. He could hold the gizmo up and say, oh, you're doing pretty well. Like you got lots of electrons going, or no, you don't. And he referred me to a book called Healing is Voltage that he was big on, that if the body's electricity and polarity is not where it needs to be, then it's going to be harder to maintain your health. So we want to think about that. And we want to, when we put kids outside, tell them by all means, take their shoes off and roll around in the mud a little.
That's right. And makes sense. We're electrical. That's how
we're electrical. Right? This is not theory. This is proven.
Right. We turn food into electrons.
Correct. You got it.
That's what we do. All right. Let's see what how we're doing on the presentation.
Here as a exemption, which is a privacy exemption, but usually they were just covering up either a professional statement of causality or something like proximity to the event that the person started taking the medication. This particular narrative is straight out of a John Grisham novel, because it comes from a district attorney's office. So imagine how that conversation went. Hey, did you hear about that mass shooting that happened? Yeah, I saw that on the news. Well, we just got the toxicology back here, and turns out this individual is on Lexapro and Ambien. Your drug wouldn't want to make people kill people, would it? Right. So this is an example, and potentially even a Brady violation, because the defense really never got this information that the prosecution was fishing around with the pharmaceutical company to see if this drug could cause someone to become violent. And as you can see, it says they became agitated because of the antidepressants. Now, this legal person isn't qualified to make a medical determination, but that's nonetheless kind of revelatory and points in the direction that this was not just proximate to the intake of the drug, but that there was some thinking that this drug could have made them do it. But the second thing that's in this event detail, I've already mentioned, is the toxicology, right? So you don't see that in the metadata. You just see, what's the person taking it? And oftentimes, the pharmaceutical company will weave a tail when they're reporting to the FDA and say that they were discontinued or whatnot. So here we have two really strong statements, linking the drug, or drugs, plural, polypharmacy in this case, to this incident of mass violence. And, this I would not have been able to obtain if I had not sued the FDA. So they fought long and hard, 2 years, to keep this information out of the public eye. So this is drilling down into a single case, but then back to the metadata. What does the data actually kind of tell us in terms of all these, 700 plus cases that were reported to the FDA of homicide? What we see is overwhelming that the single class of drugs most commonly associated with reports to the FDA of homicide are, in fact, antidepressants. So almost 45%, in fact, over 400 did involve antidepressants, followed by anxiolytics and hypnotic sedatives. Now, what's interesting is you see at the bottom, we have stimulants, but every single stimulant today has a homicidal ideation warning on the label of the drug, bar none, except it's in the wrong place. It's in the section about abuse. Whereas, there's every indication, like what Bob shared, that the psychotic side effects are on usual therapeutic doses of the drug, are not associated with misuse or abuse. So today, I think there's 3 antidepressants, Paxil, which of course is an SSRI, Wellbutrin, which I believe is NDRI, and Savella and Effexor also do. Effexor being an SNRI. Effexors, they kind of put one foot in and then one foot out. It had it on the label, then they took it off and put it on again and took it back off. So that tends to vary. So anyway, this is what we're seeing from the standpoint of the different classes of drugs, which ones are being more reported associated with these homicides. Now, one of the things I looked at that's never actually been studied is what are the most lethal combinations or cocktails of drugs. And so we see the top three are antidepressants plus an anxiolytic, antidepressants plus a hypnotic sedative, or antidepressants plus an antipsychotic. And obviously those top three are over, the majority, that's 52.7% of all of the cases involve essentially an antidepressant plus a CNS depressant. So I did interview Dr. Charles Sophie, who's a psychiatrist who treated Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista mass killer. And he basically told me, I think if you look at most of these mass shooters, you'll see they're on benzodiazepines. Certainly Elliot Rodger was, according to the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office investigative summary. So that's quite interesting. Now, the way I characterize it is the antidepressant. Some of them, in fact, as I mentioned, have a homicidal ideation warning on the label of the drug. They can be labeled for psychosis, mania, hostility, aggression. But what these CNS depressants all have in common is they're typically thought of as disinhibitors, particularly with the anxiolytics. There's disinhibition is kind of a known effect. I don't necessarily would call it a side effect. Rohypnol, roofies, are famous for lowering a person's inhibition, and they're obviously benzodiazepine. So it's almost as if the one drug, the antidepressants and or the stimulants, the uppers, if you will, kind of have a tendency, and they have the label that reflects this, to cause a person to ruminate about harming themselves or others. But in combination with an anxiolytic, hypnotic sedative, or antipsychotic, a disinhibitor, that can be a very lethal, very deadly combination. And as I mentioned, I haven't seen these studies taking a look at this. So what I did was I went ahead and published these. You can find all the reports on a website called murdermeds.com. And you can do your search either by just clicking on the little magnifying glass there on the right and typing in either the brand name or the generic name. Or if you prefer, you can search, you can do the drop down on FDA reports and pick which drug class you want to look at. And there you'll see some of the metadata as well, demographics of the patient, that sort of thing. And then you can actually just click on a link and it'll take you to the actual report. Now, I have to warn you, though, that just like Bob's story and Danny's story, some of these stories are just so touching, so sad, so moving. I'm a grown man, but when I started reading these reports, I just, I couldn't help but cry. Stories of a mom who waited until her two kids got home from school so she could shoot them and the boyfriend and herself. A woman who shot her two twin 4-year-old sons, a father who, demolished his entire family on antidepressants and or on the polypharmacy. So this is it's happening behind the scenes, and nobody's hearing about it because of the medical privacy. But I've done what I can to try to bring this to people's attention. And again, you can look at this and you can search through these reports. There's a couple of researchers, take it upon themselves to take a look at these. So if these can be of any help, feel free to, take a look at those. So I've also featured a couple of these adverse event reports in my feature documentary, Speed Demons Killing for Attention. As the name suggests, the focus of Speed Demons is on stimulant medications. The story that opens up the film is the 2014 Florida State University school shooting by a 31-year-old honors graduate who had gotten his JD from Texas Tech, had become a public defender, then a public prosecutor, then took an ADHD medication and became the first Florida State University shooter, because now there've been two. But I feature two other cases in there that are ripped straight from the FDA adverse event reports. So one is a 26-year-old senior at the University of North Dakota who, after 10 days on Adderall, killed his 5-week-old daughter. Now, what's really noteworthy from a legal standpoint, it's the first case that I'm aware of, and one of the only, where the individual was found not guilty, not by reason of insanity, but by lack of criminal responsibility, because the state's own psychiatrist, after examining him once he'd withdrawn from the amphetamine, said he did not pose a threat to himself or others, and actually diagnosed him with, at the time, stimulant or Adderall-induced psychosis with hallucinations, which, as you know, was in the DSM-4 from 1993 to 2013. It's since been taken out because the American Psychiatric Association didn't want to admit that their drug could actually cause a mental disorder. And so what you'll find now in the DSM-5 is called stimulant use disorder. And so the emphasis is on the user. You're using it wrong, right? Read misuse or abuse. But this was, again, at a therapeutic dose given to him by his psychiatrist. And he was found not guilty. In effect, the judge said the drug made him do it. He was released, no outpatient treatment required, no follow-up, just don't get back on the Adderall. And he raised 3 other children successfully. The most recent program that I released is called Prescription to Kill, hosted by Kevin Sorbo. That you'll see the one case I mentioned of the mass shooter who was on Lexapro and Xanax is featured in there in episode 1 and 3. There's 5 episodes looking at, some very well-known cases that people don't know are associated with the psychotropic medications. So everything that's in there isn't innuendo. It's either I have an FDA adverse event report backing it up, like the one that I showed you, or I have a toxicology. So that's essentially something that I kind of stumbled on. I wasn't looking for it. Like I said, I was looking at pediatric fatalities, and this just jumped out at me in the data. So I'd like to just make a general comment about some of the things that are being said. I know there's a lot of shortcomings with FAIRS.
You had something you wanted to say, Susan?
I did. That's me, never at a loss for words or comments. So many things. Whatever data we have currently on how frequently ADEs occur, are not accurate. They are a vast underreporting of the true situation. And the reason I know this is because when you're in my line of work as a therapist, you hear all day long about people's ADEs, whether those happened last week or 20 years ago to your kid, your sister, your mother, your whoever. And I'm going to, in complete seriousness, I'm not fabricating the statistic. In 0% of the times was a report ever made. 0. A lot of times people don't come in and say, Susan, let me tell you about my adverse medical reaction. That's not how it goes down. They come in and they say, oh yeah, I made a suicide attempt, it was 3 weeks ago, 3 years ago, whatever. And then, a few sessions later, we're talking and they tell me about it in a little more depth. And then they kind of mention, well, when I got to the hospital, they asked me about my meds, and I did tell them that they had just changed me from Med A to Med B. And they said at the time, oh, well, that could have been part of the equation. What tipped you from feeling bad but hanging on to feeling like I need to do myself in? The term ADE has never been introduced to that person. The concept that the drug may have helped the situation along has been introduced, but that's the end of the conversation. Not, oh, maybe we should make a report. Maybe we should let the FDA know. I personally believe that in the same way that doctors, healthcare providers, teachers, counselors, anyone who works with little people is a mandated reporter of suspected child abuse or neglect, not known, you are mandated to make a report. If you have knowledge that a child may be experiencing harm at home or somewhere and you do not make a report, it is a felony and you can go to jail for it. I believe that doctors ought to be mandated to also report suspected ADEs. So in the same way that when I'm calling in a report of child abuse, I don't need, nor should I say, Liam's being abused at home. What I should say is Liam reported to me that. He told me that on occasion, blah happens. And then I can even say to the person who's taking the call, no idea if it's true or not. Kid's been known to fabricate. It's not my job to assess whether it's true or not. There's a separate entity for that. They're called Child Protective Services. So I believe that the doctors, hospitals, medical systems ought to be mandated to report. Liam came in, had a little bit of a go round with a suicide attempt. Liam happened to mention that he had just been started on fill in name of drug. Who knows if that was a part of the equation or not, but I'm reporting it to you, FDA and maker of said drug, so that you have it on your radar to look into, because if we start getting thousands of reports that sound like Liam's, then it may be a case of no smoke without a fire. And so what I've observed is nobody's making reports, period. End of story. I've talked to doctors, I've talked to psychiatrists, I've talked to patients, I've talked to you name it. They're just not doing it. And I don't know whether it's because it's a cumbersome process and it takes a long time. And we know that doctors are overworked, overloaded, don't have enough time to spend more than 3.5 minutes with the patient. And then they need to do 12 minutes of documentation about that 3.5 minutes of interaction. I don't know, but I do know that it's not being reported. So whatever numbers we currently have, I would say conservatively multiply it by 3 and you might be in the neighborhood, or you might still be underbidding.
Fascinating.
Yeah. One more thing before we go back to the people, the informed consent thing, not happening, not happening with psychotropic drugs. Again, period, full stop. And what I mean is, so many times a person will say to me, I get one of 2 reports about antidepressants. Saved my life, best thing that ever happened to me. Thank God for pharmaceuticals. Or don't even talk to me about pharmaceuticals. I have tried every single one and then some. Not one helped. And most of them made me worse or fully crazy or psychotic or whatever. Lost my train of thought. But when I say to the person who's had the bad reaction, or when I say, well, yeah, that drug has a black box warning label, I get a blank stare. Never heard that phrase, Susan. What does that mean? So my question to anybody who cares to answer it is, what is the point of having a black box warning label if the very people who are prescribed the drugs that carry those are not informed of it? So a black box label, for people who do not know, is the highest level of warning put out by the FDA, and it means that there can be serious harms, including death, from taking the drug. With regard to the psychotropic medicines, the black box warning label typically states that we're not just talking kidney damage, liver damage, et cetera, et cetera. We're talking drug has been known to increase suicidality and homicidality. Drug has been known to increase agitation. Drug has been known to induce psychosis. People are not told this. And the people who are most at risk of that, again, I don't know why. I suppose it's just because their brains are still developing, are the younger folks. So the people who, between the age of 7, like Danielle that we heard from earlier, and I'm going to say 25, although it could be 23 or 27, I don't know. Those are the people whose brains are the most susceptible to having an adverse effect from a psychotropic medication. When you are a middle school counselor, you talk all day long with parents whose children have just been prescribed psychotropic medication. And the typical conversation that I would have would be something along the lines of, oh yeah, we talked to the pediatrician and we're just going to start this, our little peanut on a low dose of Lexapro, Paxil, whatever. We think it might take the edge off the test anxiety, and it might, alleviate some of the weepiness or the moodiness or the whatever symptom the kid is displaying. Not once have I had a parent say to me, a little bit nervous because the doctor said that it could go the other direction. Doctor told me to look out for, and boy, spouse and I, the other parent, we're going to be just we're going to be checking in with her daily or him daily, and we're going to be really monitoring the situation, because wow, that's a little nerve-wracking to know that it might make her a whole lot better or it might make her a whole lot worse.
And you very rarely hear doctors give the full breakdown of what the side effects can be. Like, this is the
Correct.
benefits, but if this thing happens, it could be really a real tough going. And so it's an awesome point to make that should be sort of standard operating procedure, you would think. Informed consent, like you were saying, to
Informed
give a
consent.
full
And I have a
breakdown.
model for what I would like to see in terms of informed consent, unless you feel that we should go back to the room.
Continue. Go ahead.
What I would like to see is, we're going to pretend that I'm the doctor, I'm the psychiatrist, Liam is my patient. Liam and I have agreed that a little dose of Paxil, Prozac, Lexapro, whatever, Pristiq, whatever we're going to give that a whirl. Here is what I think should happen. Liam, we're going to start you on that med, but before we do it, here's what I need from you. Next week's appointment or tomorrow's appointment or whatever, I need you to come with your support person. Your support person and I and you are all going to sit in a room together for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and we are going to chat at length about the positive benefits that can come from you taking this drug and the negative. And there's always the possibility of a negative, which is why we talk about the risk-benefit analysis. So when Liam's support person comes in, what I would like to see happen is that I ask Liam's support person to check in with him daily. How are you doing? Are your symptoms any better? Are they any worse? Did you sleep last night? Any crazy helter-skelter thoughts going on in there that are a little alarming to you or might be alarming to me? Was it harder to get out of bed today? Was it harder to sit still because of the agitation? Whatever it is. And then in this pre-meeting of me and Liam's support person, I'm going to slide a piece of paper over and I'm going to ask Liam's support person to sign not only that they've been informed of the risks, but that they will check in with Liam daily and that they will pick up the phone and do the 911 at the moment that there is signs of trouble. And then the other part of the equation, and you would think I wouldn't have to say it, but I have to say it. The doctor needs to pick up the phone. So, the very individual that I talked about earlier, whose doctor tapered her at an alarmingly fast rate and she crashed and burned, called him 3 times. To this day, he hasn't returned the call. So there needs to be a system in place that if you think that you or your loved one is experiencing worsening symptoms as a result of the medication, what are you doing and who are you going to? Because it's not going to work if the invitation is to call and leave a message. Just leaving the message doesn't actually do any good.
Yes, so it's such a strong point.
Yeah, let's go back.
It's such a strong point because an adverse effect of vitamin C is stomach cramps and diarrhea. The adverse effect of psychoactive drugs are suicidal ideation, and so there needs
and
to
psychosis.
be right. There needs to be an intelligent discussion of the degree of severity of what the downside could be. Shall we join the presentation?
Maybe one more thing, which is, we all got sold a,
Absolutely.
We all got sold a bill of goods and bamboozled in the 1980s when we were told, and most of us believed, we figured it out, people. Depression, anxiety, we know what it is. It is caused because you just are not a good little chemical factory in there, and you are not manufacturing enough serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin, whatever, to keep your little brain happy. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to give you a little pill, and the pill is going to give you more serotonin. So let's break that down. Number one, the pill never gave you more serotonin. It takes the serotonin that you already have in your brain and it redirects it into the synapses. Best case scenario, if the medicine works and you feel better, it is not because your brain's been given more serotonin. It is because your brain has been tricked into thinking it has more serotonin. That's fine in that it is symptom alleviating. Where it's not fine is that our little bodies are set up we want to maintain homeostasis. So if my system is getting the message, hey, Susan's good, she's got a full gas tank now on serotonin, dopamine, et cetera, well, then it's going to respond with, she's full. we're going to slow our production down because we don't want to overload this lady with it, which is part of the equation as to why it is so difficult for people to come off the drugs, because you now have less serotonin in your system than if you've been on the drug for 2 weeks, 2 years, and whatever, than you did before you started. There is a different way to increase serotonin, dopamine, whatever, and it is taking the amino acid precursors. So tryptophan, very inexpensive, non-toxic, over-the-counter amino acid, is a precursor to serotonin. There's also 5-HTP. Tyrosine is an amino acid precursor for dopamine. These things are inexpensive. They cannot be patented. And therein is the problem, because if I, the pharma company, cannot patent this thing and it's already available for peanuts at the health food store on Amazon, well, what's in it for me? So there's all of that. Then there's the fact that when they do spinal taps, which is the only way to know with certainty what a person's level of serotonin, dopamine, et cetera, in their spinal fluid, cerebrospinal fluid, they have never found a correlation. So there are people who are walking around with very high levels of serotonin experiencing crushing depression. There are people who are walking around with abysmally low rates of serotonin and they're feeling dandy and they're doing cartwheels. So that whole theory has never been proven to be true. And in fact, it's pretty much been disproven at this point. However, there's still no arguing the fact that the drugs do help some people. So why would that be? I couldn't figure it out. Chris Masterjohn helped me figure it out. He's a researcher, chemist, scientist type dude. And he said when the drugs work, and by work, again, I'm referring to symptom alleviation, it's because they are mitochondrial drugs. And your brain has a ton of mitochondria. All of a sudden the lights went off. Bing, 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 bing. That one made sense to me. It made sense to me on a very personal level, because as somebody who had always struggled with fatigue, when I started on Cymbalta, which is a SNRI, meaning that it moves both your serotonin and your norepinephrine into the little synapses in your brain, I felt my physical energy level go up like, 12 times. It was absolutely unbelievable. Having said that, if the key to some of the brain health stuff is to boost mitochondrial function, there are other non-drug ways to do it. So there are supplements you can take. Urolithin is one, MitoQ is one, ubiquinol is one. There are supplements you can take. Am I right, Liam, that exercise boosts your mitochondrial function? Yes?
Sun, exercise, all that
right,
good stuff.
Sun. Right. So a red light device, if you're living in northern latitudes and places like Washington State where it's gray and dreary and rainy and you don't want to go outside, you can still get the benefits of sunlight in your home. You buy a red light device. It's not the cheapest thing. It's about $500, but you sit in front of it and you are lowering inflammation. You are boosting your mitochondrial function. If you aim it right here, it doesn't penetrate hair. So you're going to have to lift your bangs up and, go in. At that point, you are boosting the mitochondrial function in your brain. These are good things. These are very good things. But again, I don't know that a pharmaceutical company wants us to know a whole lot about them because they can't make money on it.
Yes, that's the whole thing. It's all about the money, which is so tragic. Shall we go back to the room?
Yeah, let's talk about the veterans, because then I have a piece about the veterans.
Okey-doke.
Look at the large picture and the macro level trends, what we're actually seeing in the patient outcomes. I think if our government were to really look at this, they would find themselves in a scenario where they'd say, we're wasting $500 billion, possibly $1 trillion annually, not only in SSI and SSDI claims, as Robert Whitaker did a presentation to the UK Parliament in 2016 and showed that as antidepressants entered markets, and they showed the prescription rates within those respective markets, countries, you then saw subsequent mental illness disability rate increases, nation by nation, United States, then the UK, Denmark, down the list. And so what we're really seeing, I think, is not just the suicides, it's not just the violence, but our country is probably wasting maybe in the tune of $1 trillion annually when you combine the cost of mental illness disability claims, the opportunity cost of people falling out of the workforce, the labor market, and then the increased health burden on our health system. Because we're constantly talking about looking at what we have within We want transparency within our health system. We want transparency in what things cost and what these companies and health systems are charging the taxpayers. What if our treatments are increasing the cost of our health burden because you're going from depressed because you lost your pet, a loved one, a job, whatever it may be, to getting a bipolar or a schizophrenia diagnosis, as we discussed earlier, and then magically, miraculously falling out of the workforce, life imploding, and really nothing left. And so I think that the conversations that we're having are incredibly powerful, and everybody in this room deserves credit, especially Sarah, Jacob, and the rest of your team for putting this together, because this is not being talked about. And I applaud all of you for putting all of the energy and time to do this.
Thanks, So yeah, it sounds like, we heard from Andrew. He's uncovered through some FDA metadata and some additional data that he was about to receive that there are some very high risk combinations of medications that I'm assuming weren't studied in trials, because usually concomitant medications are exclusionary because they want to see the drug on its own if it's effective and that type of thing. And then we're hearing from Derek that our veterans are at an elevated risk of being prescribed these high risk combinations. And I know today we want to focus on, okay, well, now what's the solution? And we've alluded a little bit to informed consent, but do you want to talk a little bit about some of the informed consent legislation?
So there's a couple of bills in the House and the Senate right now. Bills are also being introduced in state houses across the country that require written consent for psychotropics. At the VA, they found in multiple health systems nationwide that doctors are failing not only to provide informed consent, and this is the Office Inspector General findings, they're also failing to document. And two health systems, major health systems, most health records showed no documentation of informed consent, which for me, that's an indicator that they're not even finding this so important of a discussion to even pencil whip it in the medical records. And so we've got a bill in the U.S. Senate, S 3314, Written Consent Act, that would require written informed consent for psychotropics between the patients and the doctors VA-wide. This is simply an expansion upon treatment for long-term opiate pain management that was put into place in 2020. There's a House version of this. It's HR 4837. They're the companion bills to each other. There's a hearing actually tomorrow in Tennessee that would require written consent statewide. Also, mandatory reporting within 20 days of a major adverse event to the FDA, among other controls. Michigan's working on similar things. But I think the larger solutions, the three big animals are written informed consent, and I hate to say it, but this is a doctor babysitting measure. Doctors hate this. But if this were happening, we wouldn't even be talking about this. Second is a retraining of the entire mental health and prescribing workforce, because our doctors, as we discussed with Danny's case earlier, they don't even know what antidepressant withdrawal is. And so they can't even identify whether they're seeing bipolar because their patient came back to them with a manic episode from adverse drug event. And then a retrain, not only a retraining, but a rollout of, as Danny also talked about, taper guidelines, slower, safer tapering. And I think if we were to do those three things nationwide, I was asked by some folks at HHS recently about that. I believe a 10% reduction in suicides nationwide, suicides alone, and then 25% reduction at the VA based upon their high prescription rates. And that's just suicide. So that's not the violence component that Andrew is speaking of, or mental disability rates or anything else.
I will highlight an organization out of the Bruyere Institute in Canada called deprescribing.org, and they have evidence-based guidelines on how to think about which patients and how to deprescribe medications, which may not mean taking them off the medication or stopping. It could also mean reducing the dose would be an effective deprescribing measure. So I don't know that they have one actually for psychotropics, and I think that is a challenge across healthcare. I work in a clinic that trains medical residents, and it could be difficult to know how do you switch patients between antidepressants, and the patients always experience a lot of, they're like, I don't want to switch because it was so bad when we tried to switch last time. So, and again, we are going to end promptly at the top of the hour, but I'll turn it to Michelle for maybe 1 or 2 questions online. I think, Andrew, if you had a response or a question, feel free to also.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on a couple points. You know, there are cases of veterans that are in the fairs. To Derek's point, there they are showing up. The second Fort Hood shooter is there, had a pretty extensive polypharmacy from the Army. But I also wanted to talk about Bob's point. I think he made the point during his talk, or maybe it was in the intro, about a common narrative that these are rare side effects. And part of the problem is, we've heard a very good presentation today about the pre-marketing evaluation. Now we're talking about fairs, but there's a lot of studies out there too, and we're just not connecting the dots. So nothing that has been discussed today is actually a surprise, especially Danny and Bob's experience with Concerta and other stimulant drugs. The FDA's own MD epidemiologist, Andrew Mossholder, published a study in pediatrics back in 2006. And there were other MD epidemiologists from the FDA, like Kate Gelperin, that were involved in the study. And they looked at all of the clinical trials of all of the ADHD drugs that are on the market, so either the amphetamine-based or methylphenidate. And what they found was a rate of 1.4 per 100 patient years of psychosis, mania, and even with hallucinations. And that's after they've excluded people that might be susceptible, right? So these are clinical trials of pediatric patients. So they had no previous history of psychosis confirmed, otherwise they wouldn't have been in the trial. And they had no comorbidities. And what Mossholder found is that this was at regular doses of the drug. And when he testified, they estimated the rate in the actual population would be 2 to 5 per 100 person years. And he testified at the Pediatric Advisory Committee meeting in March of 2006 that anything over 1% cannot be considered rare. Infrequent, arguably, he testified, but not rare. I mean, if you think about it, if you take a mid-sized high school in America, you've got at least 1,000 students. 500 of those are going to be boys, and we know that more boys are on the stimulants than girls currently, at about 20% nationwide. So 100 of those are going to be on stimulant medications, and therefore you have potentially, according to Mossholder's numbers, 2 to 5 in every high school that are going to become psychotic and potentially violent. And then you have all the cascading diagnoses and polypharmacy that goes along with that. So nothing is surprising here. The studies actually are pointing to this. It's just nobody's doing anything about it.
All right, Michelle, 2 minutes to wrap up.
I know you have a hard stop. Couple of quick housekeeping things. Everyone who's registered will get recordings if they want them of these sessions. So many people have commented on how great the slides are and everything being reviewed. I also want to say, while it's been a bit of doom and gloom here, the good news is that this group convening like it has and being there in DC, you've got awareness. You've got more notoriety than you've ever had. We've got alternative media that's paying a great deal of attention to this, contrary to the fact that MSM, which is largely pharma funded, as you know, paying those fat salaries are not. We've seen through COVID that there is less of the divinity of the white coat attitude from patients, and they are questioning things now, especially when it comes to their children. We've got these great resources like Children's Health Defense and others that are doing some great work. So the questions that have come up, we're going to have to take on the other side due to time. People are asking, the common theme is, what can we do? What can we do to increase the pace of drug labeling? Because we know these things. What can we do to let the public safety threat overrule HIPAA? What can we do to reform the entire broken system as Bob described it? So I'll leave it there unless you want to say anything, Sarah, about what the afternoon looks like.
Great, thank you. I think that's a great segue into our breakout sessions for online attendees, lunch for in-person attendees. And Jacob is going to help us understand how to move into the breakout rooms. But the topics are listed here, so you can pick which breakout session you'd like to attend. You can also move between breakout sessions. On to you, Jacob.
Yep, I am opening the breakout rooms right now, and you can choose which one you want to join or move around to different ones for the remaining hour. So I will do that momentarily. Second. Okay, all rooms are open now. And on the bottom, you can see a more or 3 dots. You can click that and you're able to choose a room. If someone's having difficulty, please let us know and we can manually move you to that room.
And do return promptly at 2 p.m. Eastern for our next session on manufacturing quality and supply chain considerations.
And you will automatically be moved back to the main session at 2.
Do you want to mute the?
Mute you.
Okay. Looks like we're going to go to breakout rooms, but I think you and me are going to kind of hang out here for a little bit.
Sounds good.
While everyone else, does that sound good?
Yeah, it does. I want to know what kind of coffee you got.
Coffee with some special. I have a OsteoFX, it's called, which is a supplement which helps the bones and
nice
cartilage.
Are you on to, do you know a coffee substitute called Bitter and Bold? It is has some chicory and dandelion and things that are health promoting, but you wouldn't be able to pass it off as coffee, but it is what I call coffee-esque and very tasty. And I tend to mix it with the real deal. And then my liver and kidneys are getting a petite boost, and my gut biome is being helped by the inulin and prebiotic fiber in the chicory.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sounds very delicious. So would you like to maybe tell the viewers what we just witnessed and talk about the panel, because we were kind of going back and forth. This is
sure, like a sort of recap, if you will.
Recap would be outstanding, because just so everyone knows, this is our first live simulcast with the Zoom and the stream. We're zooming.
It's actually the first time that this is only the 5th time that this particular day has happened, National Adverse Event Awareness Day. It happens to be on March 24th, and Bob Schwartz had his adverse event on March 24th, although he told me that I don't know that they picked the day around his date. So I believe the first thing that happened is that the attendees gathered and outlined the areas of concern and topics of focus for the day. So everything from what we've been over, that medical adverse events are far more common than the average person realizes, particularly because a lot of people don't even know the term. And so they may be aware that, oh yeah, that time that X and such happened to me. If you kind of walk them through it, they might say, oh yeah, I guess that was an adverse effect. And it's not only psychotropics. I mean, when I started telling people that I was going to be doing this day, I've had people tell me about other drugs, other classes, drugs designed to treat other conditions that are not brain health related. But an adverse effect may be anaphylactic shock. An adverse effect may be.
This is just how.
I'm sorry?
Hey everyone.
Go ahead. I was just
available to join.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So at any rate, so I think that, the first thing was just sort of establishing the premise that we are, concerned about the alarmingly high rates of adverse medical adverse drug event occurrences, some of the material that we heard was about how 45% of murderers that are in the active shooter category, toxicology reports show that 45% of them had psychotropic drugs in their system. A lot of those active shooters are young men, the ones who go and blow up people at the high school that they either are currently enrolled in or were enrolled in 3, 4, 5 years ago. We know that younger individuals who are under the age of roughly 25 are at greater risk of having an adverse medical event than other people. So one of the things that I find super interesting is that when we hear the news coverage of these events, I hear a lot about gun control. And I don't think I've ever heard on a mainstream news outlet even a mention of medication, and that may or may not have been a part of it. When I think about why that might be, I go back to the fact that not 60, over 50%, I'm not going to say the number because I don't remember it, but over 50% of the funding for media outlets comes from the pharmaceutical industry. When you are getting more, 50% or more of your funding from a particular source, it's not a stretch to think that that source may have some input into what you share, what you don't share, what spin, what angle you hone in on. So while gun control is an aspect to hone in on, I would love to see consideration given to other potential, not saying we know for sure, but 45% that's not nothing. Other potential contributors, including the use of psychotropic drugs in younger people. We are seeing that use happen younger and younger. The young woman who presented early in the day, whose name was Danielle, talked about having started on ADHD medication at the age of 7. That's not unusual today, not unusual at all. Also not unusual is that in her, the medication didn't seem to help. And granted, there are many people who say that they've gotten great benefit. However, this particular young woman had increased agitation and insomnia. However, what she relayed to us was that all of the physicians characterized that increased insomnia and agitation as being byproducts of her underlying psychiatric issues at the age of 7, rather than as a potential side effect of the medication that she was on. And so psychotropics were added in the form of, I think it was an SSRI, and then I believe she mentioned that benzodiazepines they're an anti-anxiety drug. However, they carry one of the highest levels of risk of dependency because physiologically, the body gets dependent on those drugs very, very, very quickly. Benzo addiction is supposed to be one of the hardest addictions to break. I believe there may even be rehab centers that focus specifically on individuals who are trying to break a long cycle of dependency on benzos. So at any rate, I have concern about children as young as 7 being put on such a heavy cocktail. I wish I could say that it was an isolated instance, but it's not. I saw it quite a bit, both as a school counselor and with the children and adolescents that I've seen in my private practice. And, there are kids who are on antipsychotics. There are kids who, and it doesn't mean that a doctor thought they were psychotic. Antipsychotics are often used off-label to promote sleep in individuals who are having trouble sleeping. Having trouble sleeping often goes hand in hand with depression, with anxiety, with other states that a person can experience. It's not my preferred way of treating it, particularly if other ways haven't been tried. So I would love to see, before a child is placed on an antipsychotic to help them sleep, that things such as sleep hygiene were looked at, things such as removing the devices from the bedroom, not only because the devices pose the risk of distraction. Why would I want to go to sleep when I just hear the ding and my friends are having a group chat and I don't want to miss the fun? That's very understandable. FOMO kicks in for all of us. And then in addition, from a different health standpoint, devices emit radiation. All of us would do well to use caution with how close to our body we place our device. When a device is charging, it emits a much higher amount of radiation. So all of us should take caution that when we're charging our device, we should try to do it at least 6 feet away from us. However, children are more vulnerable. And the reason is that if a child and I are in the same level of proximity to the same device that is putting out the same level of radiation, the child is going to absorb up to 10 times more radiation into her bone marrow. That's a problem. That's a big problem. Kids are sleeping with the phone right under their pillow. So again, Liam liked the little graphic of I've got the mercury in my tooth. It's only got a few inches to go to my brain. I'm going to do a graphic of the pillow, right? Here's the phone. Here's the pillow. We have like a thin barrier there. And then I got my cheek. We're not having far to go to get that radiation into me. And I'm not radiating my pinky finger that I could do without. I mean, I love my pinky finger. I would like to keep it, but I could live without it. We're going into the brain. And that is command central for everything. And the brains are breaking down. We're seeing kids crashing and burning left and right. Alarming statistics. Kids are killing themselves at the rate of 121 suicides a day, or 1 every 12 minutes, which I'm not mathy enough to do the math on how many children in our country have killed themselves during this very day, this very event that we're on, but many. Those families will never be the same. All right, Liam, I talked a lot. Your turn. Jump right in.
Maybe that was outstanding. Let's tell the audience about the organizers, Jacob and Sarah. Maybe a little bit of a background, and then if you want, we still have I think 45 minutes. If you want, we could premiere part of your video then.
Sure, we can do that. Let's see. So Sarah is a pharmacist. Am I right on that, Liam? I believe that's her background. And
yes, yeah. I can actually pull up. I have their information.
That would be terrific.
Right here. So
I know she's a pharmacist. I know she teaches other pharmacists, and became concerned about the very high numbers of adverse medical events, founded the American Society for Pharmacovigilance, hard to say, and I only learned about it myself very recently, but I am so very grateful that she stepped up to the plate, because clearly somebody needed to sound the alarm, because iatrogenic, meaning caused by the medical system, deaths are the 3rd leading cause of death in our country. So medical, not even errors, but people who have a medication prescribed for them, the doctor prescribed it properly at the right dose, the patient took it properly at the right dose, they did not take the handful when they were only meant to take 1 little pink pill a day. That is killing an awful lot of people in our country. And after, I think, is it heart? Help me with the number 1 and 2, Liam. Heart attack and something else.
Heart attack, and I saw the in your post, I believe.
Yeah.
You just recently. Heart attack.
Accidents. No. Accidents were accidents. No, accidents are the 3rd, and then there's another one in there. But in other words, right up there in the top 10 with, cancer and all the other things that kill us, are deaths that are happening because of the system that we go to make us well and healthy. And that is a problem. And the other problem that we have is a general lack of awareness about that fact. And I talk with so many people who just have phenomenal confidence in our medical system, I think because we're the United States of America. And I certainly agree that when it comes to things like precision surgeries, and you got people flying in from around the world to go to some of our top surgeons, if I am ever in a car accident, bring on the Western medical system by all means. However, when it comes to the chronic health conditions, we're not doing very well.
Yes, and
what else did you ask me to do? I'm sorry, I'm a little all over the place.
This is Sarah, right?
Right, Sarah. We were going to talk about Sarah and
profession joint appointments at the Institute of Bioscience. You can catch Sarah on LinkedIn, right? And then
correct.
Jacob is the other organizer.
Yeah. And Jacob is a
and
scientist. He's got an interesting background. We were talking this morning. He is a bioengineer. He's done some other types of work too, and he is at, oh, help me, is it Cornell? It's not Cornell, but it's up that way.
he's a researcher in the Department of Pediatrics at Weill Cornell Medicine in New York, where his work focuses on pharmacology, biomedical engineering, and translational neuroscience. So yes, these people are both Jacob and Sarah very passionate and very knowledgeable in their field of expertise.
So
And so
I want to jump in on two other things that sort of came up on my radar during the earlier part of the morning that we didn't get to yet. When the person was talking about the veterans, I'd like to tell a true story. Oh boy, years and years ago, my dad died of Lewy body dementia in an assisted living facility. And he had a lot of very wonderful caregivers, one of whom we're going to call Fred. So Fred and I, he, again, wonderful guy. I didn't have a lot of contact with Fred after Dad died in 2009. However, we were friends on Facebook. That's sort of a theoretical concept because up until about a year ago, I just didn't do social media. So when I got back on social media last spring, I messaged Fred, how you doing? Well, Fred had a story for me. He is a veteran. He's been back for 11 years. He was in Iraq. And when he was in Iraq, an IED exploded, and I've not physically seen him, but I gather he was severely injured by it, has extraordinary PTSD, like just has really, really struggled over the 11 years. During that 11-year period of time, he's been getting services steadily from the VA. He's been to at least 2 different therapists. And when I said to him, Fred, what about EMDR? And I'll explain that in a minute, what it is and its use in PTSD, he said, what is that? I've never heard of it. And I just about dropped my teeth because when I looked up the studies on EMDR in veterans, they were phenomenal. 83% of veterans who had 12 sessions, that's it, 12 sessions of EMDR, after those 12 sessions no longer met the criteria for having PTSD. And that study was not new. Like, we've known about this, that EMDR is the premier top of the line therapy for trauma. So why has a person been back 11 years and they're getting services from the VA, which is treating nothing but vets with PTSD? And they're not directing their vets, hey, you may want to check this out, because unlike the other approaches, which don't tend to be very effective and have a high rate of people dropping out, this one, 83% of you are going to feel better, a whole lot better after 12 sessions. So in terms of trying to get the word out on that and raise awareness within the veteran system, I did go to retired Colonel Art Jenkins. He is the Director of Military Affairs for Delaware County, Pennsylvania, which is the county in which I live. And I've put it on his radar, and he is happy to help disseminate the information. But it just boggles my mind that we've known for so long that this approach, 12 sessions of it, and it can be done online. Like, if you are too traumatized to leave the house and go drive, you can get EMDR online. And it's a tragedy. 11 years of this man suffering. And I'm going to go out on a limb and just bet that he's not the only one, that there are many, many. He went to a therapist, and the therapist was doing exposure therapy with him.
Oops, sorry.
To the thing, no problem, that gave you trauma. So exposure therapy is great if you have agoraphobia, if you have OCD, if you have many other conditions. It is contraindicated for people with PTSD. And the reason is that we know from a neurological standpoint, neurons that wire together, fire together, which is the neurologist speak for the more you activate a particular neurological pathway, the stronger and better developed that neurological pathway becomes, and the easier it is for you to slide into it. So if we make a person like Fred go back and talk about the traumatic event in greater and greater detail over and over and over and over, which is what exposure therapy would be for somebody coming back from war, you're making the situation not just a little bit worse, but grossly worse. So anyway, I'm delighted, Liam, that you have put me on this simulcast, because with the number of viewers that you get, there's a chance that of all the viewers, a few of you will know a veteran, or you will know somebody who's involved in policy making at the VA, and you can go to them and say, hey, heard about this thing called EMDR. Can we just put it on veterans' radars? I actually stopped the guy yesterday because that's who I am. He was in his combat fatigues. And so I said, thank you. And he smiled and nodded. And then I had to wait. I turned around and I went back and I said, I'm sorry, it's none of my business, but my specialty is inserting myself where it's none of my business. And I told him the story. And I said, I just want you to remember that for you and any of your buddies, that if you come back from a combat situation and you're dealing with PTSD, but as well for all of you viewers, if your PTSD has come from the car accident, the rape, the fire, or what we call small t trauma, which is the dysfunctional family, the boss who is really malevolent and difficult to work for. EMDR works great for those situations as well. I never did say what it was. Okay, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It literally uses rapid eye movements, which tend to be a lot of this, to help a person reprocess the trauma. And I know that sounds wacky. First time I heard about it, I thought it was wacky. However, it works, and it works to a degree that just blows other therapies out of the water. What it is doing with that little back forth, is it is stimulating the left part of your brain and then the right part of your brain. So we call it bilateral stimulation. Left, right, left, right, left, right. That stimulation works some magic. We know that it accesses the same neurological pathway that is active when a person is in the rapid eye movement segment of their sleep cycle. And the rapid eye movement of the sleep cycle is when a person processes their emotions. So we know it does that. We also know that it can differentiate, it awakens the part of the brain that can differentiate fantasy from reality. As a therapist, that makes sense to me when we're talking about trauma, because an awful lot of times a person who's experienced trauma at some level blames themselves. So the proverbial rape victim who says, I shouldn't have been in that situation. I shouldn't have been out alone at night. I shouldn't have worn that particular dress that was too whatever. Whereas the reality is nobody deserves to get raped, no matter what time of day, what time of night, no matter what the outfit is. So for whatever reason, and I can't explain it any better than I have, but to some degree, who cares? If it gets 83% of highly traumatized individuals to a point within 12 sessions where they are no longer meeting criteria for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder, who cares? I mean, it's non-invasive. You're not going to get any, I'm not going to say you're not going to get side effects, because actually you can. It can be very intense emotionally when you're going through it. But you're not killing your liver. You're not killing your kidneys. You're not going to grow a third eyeball. You're not going to flip your lid and, do some, go into a psychotic state like some of the drugs have caused people to do. So we'd just love for that to be on everybody's radar.
Absolutely. All right, I just got a invitation to be part of a breakout room.
Nice, let's do it.
Well, for some, this is part of what Going Live is all about. We are having difficulty bringing the breakout room into the screen share.
Got it.
I don't have a way.
Can we listen? Can we at least eavesdrop on them, even if we can't visually spy on them?
That's wow.
The title of drug safety physician is commonly used when referring to the physicians, of course, providing pharmacovigilance. And when you see the title of someone as a safety physician, MD, medical doctor, physician, when you see a job opening or job description, the job role, the title of the role is that this company is looking for safety physician, then the requirement is to have a physician or an MD to be involved in this role. I'm personally a pharmacist by training, and when I see a requirement, or when I see the title of hiring a safety physician, then I will not apply.
Okay, so this is a presentation by Omar Amir, and he's doing a presentation talking about the rules and responsibilities of the pharma governance team. Yes. So we can't, unfortunately, it's very presentation oriented, this speech. So I think it's best if we just pivot to maybe, do we want to
I think you and I
show
can
your video
probably
real
keep
quick?
talking. I mean, I think if
it's up to you. We're still live. We still have maybe a half an hour till we reach our LinkedIn limit.
I say let's maximize. I say let's just keep going. Let's explore everything we can explore, and when we run out, then you tell me what we do.
Okay, so let me let's try to play the introduction to your video. All right.
Wait, Liam. No, there is something I want to say before we get to that. So when
okay, sure.
So when we're talking,
no, just on a technical aspect, it would be interesting to see if we can bring a video in and if there's any echo, because at the very beginning, I don't know if you noticed, there's a so continue on your thoughts.
Can I have 5? Because I can do this in 5 or fewer minutes.
Absolutely. No, the floor is yours. It's just that at some point I would just like to play the presentation, the very opening, at least, just as we do this. We're pioneering this multi-live event.
One
so
day
we're
we'll be in the
actually
history
streaming live, and we're actually live streaming, simulcasting a live event, which is not is technically difficult. It's not the average way that most people go live. But so please continue, Susan. And
the other thing that I wanted to add, as we're on this whole discussion of adverse medical events, and to a large degree, we're focusing on psychotropics, which are the medicines used for brain health stuff. And by that, I mean anxiety, depression, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, ADHD, attentional issues, and some of the others. In an awful lot of people, they don't work. So one of the fun facts that most people are not aware of is that in drug trials where the efficacy of an antidepressant is compared to a placebo. Liam, you probably know it. Do you know the number? Because I'm going to have you guess if you don't know. By what percent does the drug outperform the placebo?
At what percent? I think it's some ridiculous sort of number where the placebo almost outperforms the drug.
You're pretty close. Like 13%. So the drug outperforms the placebo by 13%, which at that point, you can't exclude the possibility that the improvement is from the fact that you're taking a little pill, and placebo effect is a real thing. But anyway,
it's amazing, isn't it?
Well, actually, I guess actually I have to take that out because there is a placebo group. But whatever. So 13%. In studies for mild to moderate depression, not for severe, but for mild to moderate, exercise outperforms antidepressants. So there's that. And then I want to tell about a particular case that I read about. It was in the Washington Post. I believe it was 3 years ago. There was a woman, true story, catatonic in an institution, 20 years. It's a long time to be catatonic. A doctor got interested in her and convened a whole lot of experts, and they ran a battery of tests like nobody's business. And what they finally came up with is that this individual had an autoimmune attack on the brain. So they changed the protocol. And instead of giving her whatever drug regimen she was on, they gave her an immunosuppressant. So we're going to tone down the immune response since the immune system is attacking the woman's own brain tissue. And we're also going to give steroids. And the reason we're going to give steroids is that they are an anti-inflammatory. And we know that high levels of inflammation are problematic. And in the brain, they're problematic. And they equate to depression, anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. Within 3 months of this new protocol, immunosuppressants and steroids for the anti-inflammatory effect, the woman began speaking. She recognized family members. and she wasn't speaking gibberish. She was making sense. So that inspired the doctors to kind of look around and think, well, I wonder if anybody else is in this category. And they found a woman who had been 10 years catatonic. And boy, did she respond. So the question that I would pose is, given that we know that autoimmune disorders are rampant in our country, particularly among women, and I'm going to say that of women over 40, this is not a scientific statistic, but it feels like 2/3 to 3/4 of them have an autoimmune diagnosis, yours truly included. How do we know if the immune system can go rogue and if it can attack anything from the eyes to the skin to the joint tissue, the connective tissue, why wouldn't it attack the brain? And so if we have people who are in the category of, I'm not responding to whatever intervention, whether it's psychotherapy, medication, exercise, why wouldn't it make sense to just do a trial of, let's give you an immunosuppressant, maybe stay away from places that are super germy while you're on your immunosuppressant, and let's give you some steroids, and let's see if you feel better. And given that a catatonic woman had a significant response in 3 months, I'm guaranteeing that the rest of us that are sort of a train wreck but not catatonic are going to respond in 3 weeks or less. At least then there would be diagnostic information as to what is causing the brain symptoms. So I think that's super interesting. And the other thing I would add is a very fun topic, especially for people who are on their lunch break, because it might be lunchtime, fecal transplants. So if I have schizophrenia and Liam does not, and you take my poop and transplant it into his gut, guess who then starts to develop symptoms of schizophrenia? And it has gone the other way, that if you take the poop of a schizophrenic person and put it in a person who is not showing any signs of schizophrenia, they will develop schizophrenia symptoms. All of which is...
Isn't that incredible? Isn't that just absolutely...
And also, who thinks of the studies? Like, who wakes up in the middle of the night and says, you know what I'm going to do? Going to get some schizophrenic poop and see what it does in a non-schizophrenic person. But all of which is to say, while we are medicating things with very little success, there are other approaches out there that are showing dramatic results. Why aren't we exploring those a bit more, even if we still use meds when we need to?
Absolutely. And I think they said 2017 was the year of the gut.
Yeah.
Where all these studies that were going on for decades all came together around the world, and they just were blown away by how much the gut is involved in the production of neurotransmitters and how important it is for mental health. And with that knowledge, it seems like, if anybody has any type of mental issue, the very first thing you would think would be that modern medical professionals would want to. There is no risk in healing the gut. It is a absolutely. There's nothing.
Last thing I promise, 30 seconds, which is
the
sugar consumption. We're as a nation, we are consuming, I think it's 10 times more sugar than people did 100 to 150 years ago. Sugar is a horrendous substance from a gut health perspective. I like it as well as the next person. Cookie is very tasty, but that is the sad reality. And then the other thing is that antibiotics also wreak havoc on the gut. Because our kids and we are sicker and sicker, we are being prescribed more and more antibiotics. The rates of IBS and IBD, which are irritable bowel syndrome and irritable bowel disease, both of which are just umbrella terms for, I have abdominal symptoms. I've got constipation, diarrhea, I'm uncomfortable, whatever it is. Those are through the roof. So all of this goes together. So when we talk about reasons for the soaring and crescendoing levels of kids' anxiety and depression, the fact that they're eating a very high sugar diet, a diet that's high in refined processed foods, and getting sick frequently because their immune systems are not doing well, and then being prescribed antibiotics for the sickness that their immune system can't overcome, it's just a vicious cycle. because then the antibiotic is going to further deteriorate the gut, which is going to further deteriorate the brain, which is going to further, it just keeps going.
Yes, and like European cultures, they have a very like in France, cheese with raw milk is easily readily available. Lait cru, raw milk in French, and then yogurt is a very sort of staple part of the European diet. With every meal, yogurt is consumed, and so it's so because when you take an antibiotic for whatever, it's literally like you're carpet bombing your gut's natural microbiome, and the fact that we don't, after an antibiotic regime, we don't say, okay, now you have to build it back. We don't do
Right,
that.
exactly. So Liam, you're telling me that yogurt is good and they eat a lot in France. So if I just give my 6 and 8-year-olds some Go-Gurts, I've covered it, like I'm helping their biome?
Absolutely, yes.
No, but in all seriousness, can you explain it? Because in all seriousness, when I raised some hell at the kids' Montessori school years ago about the snacks that were being provided, I went in to pick them up one day, and this very sweet teacher, she was a sweetheart, and she comes running over. She goes, "Susan, you're going to be so happy. The kids had Go-Gurts for snack." And she goes, "Yogurt's healthy, right?" And I said, "Well," I'm not going to say her name. We'll call her Sally. I said, "Well, Sally, let's take a look." And I got the ingredients out, and I had to explain to her that the order in which the ingredients are listed corresponds to the quantity in the product. So if sugar is the first ingredients, it means there is more sugar in the product than there is milk.
And anything else?
Right.
I'm unfamiliar with this product. You're saying Go-Gurt?
Yeah, it's one of these kids things. They have yogurts, Liam, that if you show them to your French friends, they're not going to say it's yogurt. It is basically, they got gummy bears in there. They got all the artificial colors. It's sprinkles. It's dessert in a cup, but I think the manufacturer of said product thinks, and rightly so, if I just call it yogurt, the parents will think it's healthy and they'll buy it. So there needs to be a little bit of you need to have some consumer discrimination, whatever it is. You gotta use your brain. You gotta read the label. You gotta.
Absolutely, because otherwise it's just sugar. Then you're just eating tons of sugar. Okay, so yes, should we try to premiere your video? And so what we're doing once again is we're simulcasting. So there's a number of different audio inputs, and to share the screen, there's a function. They say, "Do you want to share the audio on the screen?" So I'm going to share the audio on the screen, and then we're going to look at it to see. After we're done, to see if there's any echo. So we're just going to play the very sort of beginning of the
and Liam, I'm going to duck out just for a minute, and I'll be right back.
Okay,
all righty.
No, we're good.
All right, I'll be right back.
Good. Okay. All right. So this is the premiere, and we're going to press play, and I'm going to monitor the audio, and so we'll see how it goes. Okay, I believe that did not come through, and so I'm going to now route it towards the StreamYard tool. Here we go again, the premiere video for Susan Moroto, her interview.
Susan has spent 30 years doing what the mainstream medical establishment told her was impossible, healing herself and helping others by going deeper, asking harder questions, and refusing to accept this is just how it is. She's a licensed clinical social worker, a certified EMDR therapist, a medical advocate, and a writer whose own life story is the very reason she does what she does. She found the Maha movement because she's been living it long before it had a name. Please welcome the brilliant Susan Longstreth-Morodo. Susan, your Substack, Cartwheels in the Snow, is a memoir about growing up with a mother who had serious brain health issues and spent years in psychiatric hospitals. That experience had to be the invisible engine behind everything you've built as a therapist and health advocate. When did you realize your childhood was actually your greatest teacher?
That's a super good question. I think probably when I was in college. By the time I was in college, it was clear to me that I had some empathic tendencies.
Okay, great. I
resident
think we were successful. I'm going to give us some applause. I think that was a success, and Susan is out for the moment, and you've been watching the National Adverse Drug Awareness Day event. And this event is created to, it's sort of like the elephant in the room. It's like you can't criticize MD-directed medicine without getting a backlash in terms of your credibility. People want to say you're a conspiracy theorist or a vax denier. But like Susan mentioned earlier in the program, that death by pharmaceuticals through mistakes, through mismanagement, through negligence, whatever, death because of pharmaceutical intervention is the third leading cause of mortality in America. And so that's just such an absurd concept. It's hard to believe that there's not more outrage, and it seems like every one of us has a story, a horror story to relate when it comes to the relationship that we have with allopathic medicine. And I myself have my own horror stories, and I haven't been to an MD-directed doctor for the last 30 years. I decided I would, I just didn't want to participate in it anymore. And so I fired my MD and never looked back. And my own personal health story is that I was a triathlete for many years, and I knew nothing about nutrition. So my body was pulling from my organs and my bones the nutrients it needed to operate it at a high level. And so I'm going through sort of a rebirth in terms of rebuilding rebuilding parts of my body that have been suffering from a chronic condition for decades. And it's just such an incredible experience to you don't realize how much pain that you're in when you're in a chronic disease state, because you internalize the severity of your condition, and you also take drugs to mask the alarm that your body is signaling, and through the hostile takeover of your biological system through pharmaceuticals, your body has to use even more resources to make your system whole, to process the drugs which are symptom oriented. The body doesn't say, "Oh, thank you for the engineered petroleum molecule." It's like, what the heck is going on? And so you spend even more resources taking care of the pharmaceutical than you would with it alone. Okay, Susan's back. Susan, I think we're going to wrap up here. Are you ready to join us on the broadcast here? Yes.
I'm muted.
Okay.
I'm ready. And I went into the cafeteria area and grabbed a little food, and I ran into Bob Schwartz. So when he comes in, he had some things he wanted to say this morning that he didn't get to. And I said, well, come on in. Liam's running his simulcast, and he'll come in at some point, and then we can. We have 14 minutes before our time. All right, I'll text him that he's got 14 minutes.
We've been on for close to 4 hours. That's a record for me. And I don't know about you. Have I
ever talked for 4 hours straight? I'm going to say no. If you would ask my family, they would say like every day. When I texted them the live stream link, and I said, if you want to hear me saying all the same things I rant and rave about in the kitchen all the time, but you want to hop on. So, all right, let's go do it. And I'll text Bob.
Okay. So,
actually, I'll go tell him. That'll be faster.
All right. So, Susan, we have an actual interview that we're going to attend to. And we're at the end of our National Adverse Drug Event Awareness Day simulcast. And from a technical aspect, it was very interesting. We had echo problems in the beginning, and I don't think, well, I'm going to have to check, but I think that the audio might have been non-existent for the first 15 minutes or so while I was kind of troubleshooting how to get everything going. So what we hope to do is to continue these live broadcasts so people can tell their stories, and so we can try to find solutions in what can be done. All right, looks like Susan has returned.
And Bob should be in here any minute. He's going to grab whatever he needs to grab. Here's the thing. Oh, I know what I'm hearing buzzing. Never mind. Okay.
Is it your grounding pad?
The grounding pad doesn't buzz, but the little EMDR tappers underneath buzz.
Okay.
So that bilateral stimulation,
yes,
if I get nervous, it'll help me calm down. I also feel like my brain works better. Like if I have to sit down and focus sometimes, I will put them on and I feel like the writing or whatever.
Liam, hey, Bob Schwartz.
All right, Bob Schwartz. It's great to have you on the broadcast.
Thanks for broadcasting here today. Let me turn it a little bit this way so we can take that bright light out of the situation.
Perfect. Yes, you are a filmmaker, so you know the power of the image.
You want to know what? You gotta look good on film. You know what? Or you gotta make it up with the story, one or the other.
One or the other. All right. So what do you have for us, Bob? What would you like to say?
Hey, it's just been a great day. And, we're going to kick things off with March 24th. Going forward is going to be the National Adverse Drug Event Awareness Day. It's going to be a significant day in healthcare, in the healthcare industry, because it's going to be, the national day that, the revolution of healthcare safety is going to be established on that day going forward. Just like any other industry that you have, you have the automobile industry, that they come up with solutions to make the automobile safer. We need to do that in the healthcare arena. We need, the automobile had airbags, seat belts, and anti-lock brakes. We need to do better in the healthcare arena, in regards to your health. Kind of very similar, delivering ROI. So you have a wealth system that's all about return on investment. We need to have a health system that establishes return on health, and we're going to be working hard to demand that better for the industry and working with people.
Fantastic. Did I have your name correct?
Sure.
While you were talking, I figured I'd get a lower third going.
If you're Spaceball fans, it's May the Schwartz be with you.
May the Schwartz be with you. So tell us about your movie.
Thanks so much. The movie was done to tell a very difficult story that happened to me 22 years ago on March 24th. And during the pandemic, I realized that telling my story one-on-one to people it's just a rough story to really to get somebody one-on-one. But if we put it on a film, we can have the masses see it, and we can get the message out there a whole lot better. So, and during the pandemic, I teamed up with an Emmy award-winning director, Jose Acosta, and down in Atlanta, Georgia, and we put a 30-minute short film together that won a Telly Award out in New York for best documentary out of 15,000 entries. And the story really describes, the great life I was living as a 40-year-old man living out in Atlanta, Georgia, married, 2 kids, having just a phenomenal success in my technology career. And then a simple doctor's appointment that just went totally rogue, based on the last 10 minutes of the appointment, as far as him prescribing me a psychotropic drug, an ADHD drug. He prescribed it at 3 times the starting normal dose, which cascaded into a kind of a Beautiful Mind movie scenario where, I had an acute psychosis, and then, life kind of spiraled out of control after that. And 2 years later, I was, I lost my family, I lost my home, I lost my career. But during all those years of darkness or silence, stigma, and shame, I learned to, take on a new cause with truth, transparency, and trust to help others, and help them find, make sure that this unspeakable hardship doesn't happen to any one of them.
And the doctor who prescribed this drug didn't even get an OSHA ticket, I can imagine.
He was given what? I'm sorry?
He didn't even get an OSHA ticket, occupational, like he devastates your life and nothing happens. Am I correct?
You want to know, surprisingly, and I share it well in the documentary film as far as litany of indifference. Systemically, I went to all the agencies. I went to the manufacturer of the drug, and they tried to do an adverse event. My doctor never sent the medical records. I went back to him, and he was denying that he had, he ever did anything wrong. And he was, very good on, providing me a polypharmacy of solutions. But, when I approached him a year later, that pointed out that the Wall Street Journal did an article on the danger of the drug. And I said, we need to really go back to the manufacturer and ask for help. He got up from the table. The next day he called me and said, I'm no longer my patient. Come pick up your file. and he threatened me after that too. So kind of a bizarre way of trying to get your health, and reached out to the FDA. Legally, I try to go through a number of legal routes, but the system is stigmatized, and it's it's kind of a so sad, too bad situation.
And this is the movie, correct?
Yeah, that is the website. If I had known the risk, got a great trailer on there, 90-second trailer on there that you can see, and then I put some statistics down below, and we got Tom Cruise.
We're gonna play the. We're gonna play the trailer, and then that'll be it. That'll be the we're at the 4-hour mark, so LinkedIn doesn't let us.
That'd be great.
And Liam, maybe at some point you could play the trailer to An Inconvenient Study, because I think that is the other movie. Those two, Bob's and An Inconvenient Study, are just so powerful and so eye-opening.
Alrighty, let's see what we can do here. Oh, I've got the dreaded. All right.
You want to go back a little bit? There you go.
Okay, we need sound. Let's get some sound going. That would be better. All right. Come on.
The medical term for Bob's condition is medication-induced psychotic disorder.
I can't be the only person that's gone through this. I can't be.
If I had gone through something like that myself, I would have expected to be examined and properly diagnosed and properly treated by those who were responsible for me being in that state of mind. It wasn't even shown all the time by crying. Sometimes it was shown by the efforts he made not to cry. But you could still see the pain.
It was most sad, really, about Bob's story was the way the medical practice really failed him.
I believe that there is a silent universe of other cases like Bob's that exist. People have not come forward or not felt that that they had a voice or that there was a sympathetic ear.
We have messages every 21 hours. Why is that happening? NIH is not allowed to look for the answer to that question. They're frightened that there's a big pharma that is going to be angry at them with the answer.
My fellow Americans, this morning, our nation is overcome with shock, horror, and sorrow. I am open and ready to listen and discuss all ideas. Republicans and Democrats have proven that we can join together in a bipartisan fashion to address this plague.
Drugging children with them not knowing. Do you know Ritalin? Do you know now that Ritalin is a street drug?
Youngsters who are steeped in a culture of violence, they've been drugged in many cases. Many of these young boys have been on Ritalin since they were in kindergarten.
Outstanding. Bravo. That was great. So you can find
this, a lot of people like that trailer to just find out what exactly happened.
Start back up in 2 minutes. Just a heads up, everyone's headed back to the email.
But hey, I wanted to just thank you for being here today on March 24th, and that we're going to be bring 2 more hours of great information for your viewers.
Awesome. All right. So we're at the limit for this broadcast. I can send a link, and we can start it up again to catch whatever else is happening. Susan, let's say goodbye, and then that's be it for the simulcast. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Yep.
That you? That's not me. Is that you? Yeah.
Okay, so that's it for the simulcast. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and we should have some outgoing music. There we go.
Are you going to leave and then we're going to do the next one so that the afternoon is covered?
Yeah, we're just done as far as LinkedIn is concerned. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you in a bit. All right, take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.